He was a young woman overcoming obstacles.
She had these cognitive challenges that created some difficulties.
But she graduated from high school.
She's just a woman who was looking for love.
And she'd finally found it.
He is giving her some sincere attention.
She's found someone that accepts her.
Somebody who really sees her.
But her happiness would be short-lived.
Hey, ambulance.
She had been beaten up.
How many people jumped on her? I can't remember.
Was it simply because she was different?
She had developmental delays.
She didn't speak up for herself.
She was bullied throughout her lifetime.
Or had her desire for love lured her into a trap?
Someone took total control of their life.
And she wasn't the only victim.
That's what I feel like. Torture.
Her situation was similar.
Not only is he a serial abuser, he is a chronic liar.
There are monsters out there in the world.
September 7th, 2014. It's a quiet Sunday evening in Lumberton, North Carolina, a town of only 20,000, 2.5 hours southeast of Charlotte.
Lumberton is very rural. It's in the southeastern part of North Carolina. There's a lot of good in Lumberton.
Everybody knows each other. And when things go down, news travels.
And the 911 call that comes in at around 5 o'clock is sure to get everyone talking.
Robertson County 911. Do you need an ambulance or the law?
Hey, ambulance.
The caller is 29-year-old Christopher Lennon.
My girl is not waking up.
He says he's found his girlfriend, Princess Powell, unresponsive in their living room.
You say she's not waking up?
No.
He doesn't have a working cell phone, so he went next door to use the phone to make the 911 call.
Okay. Okay, stay on the line.
After dispatching first responders to Chris and Princess's address, the operator tries to get some preliminary information.
Do you know if she's breathing?
I don't know.
Christopher was hysterical.
And based on what he tells the dispatcher, it's easy to see why.
She's breathing for about 2 months.
Princess Powell was a lovable soul who had faced unique challenges in her young life.
She did have special needs, which set her apart a little bit.
Her level of thinking was probably about 5 or 6 years behind of what her actual age is. Talking about baby dolls or just talking about things that you expect a typical 9 or 10-year-old to discuss and not a 16 or 17-year-old.
Which sometimes caused problems for the teenager.
As far as Princess and all kids that's in that bracket, the biggest challenge for them is peer pressure.
She was one of the people that was bullied throughout her lifetime.
And then when you fall within that spectrum, then you only want acceptance. So I think Prince's biggest challenge is I just want to be treated like an individual. I want to fit in.
Princess did finish high school, but soon faced a new challenge.
She became pregnant.
She might not understand the future ramifications of that. But in the right now, I can see her smiling and just, everybody she ran across, she probably was rubbing her belly and saying, I'm pregnant.
But reality soon intervened.
After she gave birth to her oldest child, she gave her parents custody.
With her challenges, she wouldn't have been able to do everything as a mother. So like in the middle of the night when a child wake up, she may need to warm a bottle or diaper change. She would have needed that assistance or someone to help her to be able to understand that. This is a real live baby. It's not a baby doll.
Although her parents had legal custody and responsibility of her son, Princess remained in his life.
She still lived with her parents. She was able to spend time with her son.
Her mom and stepdad make sure the child is well cared for.
But the experience left Princess wanting more from life.
She's just a woman who was looking for love.
Sometimes we need to be reminded that just because someone has special needs, that doesn't mean that they can't have secure attachments.
And in 2011, at 18 years old, she finally found it when she met Christopher Lennon.
He was 8 years older than her.
To an 18-year-old that might have been impressionable and looking for love, not even considering having special needs, I could see where Princess might have thought he might have been her saving grace, very knowledgeable and more established. That would have been very appealing.
That's especially true considering the bullying she experienced as a teen.
Here Christopher comes along and is not one of those bullies. And he is giving her sincere attention. For someone like Princess with those cognitive struggles, that will make her feel like, whoa, I have found my soulmate. Finally, I found somebody who really sees me.
You're so beautiful.
She feels a sense of belonging, a sense of security.
She seemed genuinely happy with him.
The relationship moved quickly.
When people have young love, they go full speed ahead. Before anybody realized anything, she was packing everything up and moving in with him.
And the following year, she had even more exciting news.
I'm pregnant.
Really?
Yeah.
What better thing to be able to conceive a child with the love of your life, to be able to start fresh.
This was an opportunity to get it right. Another shot at giving birth to a child that she and her partner would love on and raise right there in their home.
And then, less than a year after Princess gave birth to their little boy, the couple was expecting again.
Even if there are some challenges as being a mother, it appears that she is functioning, she's moving on her journey.
But now, Princess's journey appears to be in jeopardy.
Chris called 911 and says he's found Princess unresponsive on their couch.
Do you know if she passed out or what happened?
No.
Then, too distraught to talk, he hands the phone back to his neighbor.
There was no cell phone, no landline in the home. So he went to a neighbor and borrowed their phone.
He said he woke up. She was lying about it.
Okay. Tell him he needs to calm down.
This was very scary for him.
With first responders on the way, the dispatcher sends Christopher and his neighbor over to the couple's trailer to check on Princess.
Okay, listen, is she breathing? Have him see if she's breathing.
He can feel her breathe.
The answer appears to be no.
Ask him, does he want to try and do CPR?
No, I think it's too late for that.
I'm sorry?
I think it's too late for all of that.
The neighbor is someone who used to work at a funeral home.
I think she gone.
And when EMTs arrive on the scene a few minutes later, they confirm it.
They declared her dead.
And it didn't appear that she died from natural causes.
They noticed bruising to her face.
It was clear that she had suffered an assault of some kind.
Major Grimes, I'll need you at this location, please.
In the small town of Lumberton, North Carolina, 21-year-old Princess Powell had overcome numerous obstacles to build a happy home with her boyfriend, Christopher Lennon.
She's found someone that accepts her for who she is.
They had a child together and another one on the way.
But now, first responders have declared Princess dead and requested homicide detectives at the scene.
Major Grimes, we're gonna need you at this location.
She had bruising about her face, a lot on her right side and above her eyes.
In addition to the bruising, there was also evidence of blood coming from her nose.
Detectives are also able to determine that Princess has been dead for some time.
She was cold, and rigor mortis was setting in.
Looking around the house, the detectives find traces of blood.
You had blood that was in the bathroom of the residence. You had blood that was in the kitchen.
There was blood on the refrigerator door, along the walls, even on the cabinets.
Unsure where and how the attack on Princess occurred, the detectives turn to her boyfriend Chris to see what he can tell them.
Thank you, officer. Thank you. We appreciate it very much. All right, come with us.
On the scene, he was very friendly, very cooperative.
Just have a seat for us, Chris.
What about all the marks on her? Bruises and stuff on her face?
Chris then indicated they had left the night before around midnight, 1 a.m., walking towards the BP near their home.
She like walking all the time, man. We'd be bored at the house.
He and Princess walked down, made a purchase, and then began walking back home. As they got close to the residence, a vehicle pulled up and several females exited. He seen the females walking towards Princess.
Look who we got here!
So he goes and runs for cover.
Oh, baby, let's go! I mean, what could I do?
And he assumed Princess had been right behind him.
I told her to come on.
Christopher says he hid. And when he heard the car pull away, he'd emerged to find Princess lying on the ground.
He sees that
You okay, baby?
she has been beaten.
I guess she couldn't keep up or something.
You okay?
She says she's okay, and they proceed to go home.
Look, let's get you home. Come on.
Back at the house, Princess cleaned herself up.
Which could explain the spots of blood in the kitchen and bathroom.
She's able to collect herself to the point that he says she's acting normal.
But Christopher says that as the evening went on, he became increasingly concerned about Princess and their unborn child.
At some point, she ends up in the bathroom for an hour.
Hey. Hey.
He thought that it possibly could have been a miscarriage because she was in there for so long.
Princess.
He was able to convince her to allow him into the bathroom, and he helped her off the toilet and back to the living room onto the sofa.
But after he got her settled on the couch, things still didn't seem right.
She sat up there talking out of her mind.
You want to go to the emergency room?
I think I just need to rest.
Okay.
I told her to lay down, maybe she'll feel better.
But in hindsight, that was a mistake.
I woke up this morning and I looked at her like that and I said, oh.
Princess! Princess, wake
It was
up!
possible that her head injury was more serious than she had realized.
I mean, I was just in shock.
Chris is still in such shock that when the detectives turn back to the women that attacked Princess, there's little he can tell them.
He couldn't give us the color or the make of the vehicle.
They couldn't describe any of the women except for that they were black.
It was dark last night, man.
And the person who could help detectives the most is dead.
It's entirely possible that Princess knew her attackers.
Back during her school days, she was bullied.
Is it possible some of her bullies came back?
Or is Chris not being as forthcoming with the detectives as he appears?
He abandoned his pregnant girlfriend while she was being sought.
When police press Chris about his relationship with Princess, he says things are great between them.
He denied that there was any type of problems within the relationship.
There's no arguments. There's no fights. There's no issues whatsoever.
But there was something weighing on them.
He said that a few months earlier, the state had taken custody of their oldest child.
He couldn't really communicate to the police why that happened.
Although he hinted that it could have had something to do with Princess's disability.
They've been coming to the house, well, for our visitations.
They were working very hard at getting their child back.
They were getting through that. And this new baby that was on the way was going to make things even better.
After finishing up with Christopher at the crime scene, the detectives go to inform Princess's family of the devastating news.
They're distraught that their princess is gone.
And when the detectives relay what Christopher told them, her parents struggle to make sense of it.
They described her as a very mild-mannered, very loving, very easy to get along with person.
However, her parents admitted that Princess could have run into trouble in the past year.
Why do you say that?
Well, we really haven't been in touch with her.
Once she started living with Chris, the family really stopped seeing her, stopped being able to communicate with her.
That raised an immediate red flag for detectives.
Dictating who you can and cannot communicate with, that's one of the primary signs of control and abuse.
Princess Powell's family has just told the detectives investigating her murder that they haven't spoken to their daughter in nearly a year.
Her family says that once she got with Chris, that she no longer communicated with them.
He met her right after she graduated from high school, and that's when he began to put a wedge between her and her family and friends.
But they say the real break came once the couple moved in together.
The family really stopped seeing her, stopped being able to communicate with her.
And she even stopped coming by to see her son.
What happened next was even more surprising.
Their disability checks that was coming to them to help support her older son had been redirected back to her.
Why do you think she'd do that?
It wasn't her. It was Chris.
Having special needs sometimes makes a person susceptible to being easily taken advantage of or being easily manipulated.
She often had problems making decisions on her own, and that enabled Chris to take advantage of the situation.
Once he isolated her from the family, knowing Princess, she would not have gone anywhere without his permission.
Okay, but Princess never told you he was abusing her, right?
We suspected it, yeah.
However, they never were able to confirm because of the lack of contact with her.
But Princess's stepfather says he did see firsthand just how much power Chris had over her.
A month or two ago, I was at the gas station.
And when he saw her, he was shocked to see the condition that she was in.
He notices a black eye on Princess's face.
Princess?
He attempted to speak to her, and she just ignored him.
And she walked right by me.
Worried, he'd followed Princess.
He tried to pull her aside in the parking lot and say, hey, you don't have to live like this. Please, come home. We love you. You have options.
But Princess continued to ignore him.
Princess, come on home, baby. We miss you. Princess.
It wasn't long before Chris noticed, of course, and Chris just really went off on her stepfather.
Leave her alone.
He was telling him, I'm tired of seeing you around. You need to stay away.
That was the last time I ever saw her.
You both have our deepest condolences.
Disturbed by what they've learned from the family, the detectives return to the trailer park to talk to Chris and Princess's neighbors.
The neighbors never saw Chris beat Princess, but they did report hearing screams coming from the home where Princess and Christopher were living.
It was a volatile, violent relationship, completely opposite of how Chris described it.
The neighbors also say that Princess was very submissive to Chris.
Several of the neighbors said that anytime you seen them together, he always walked in the front and she walked behind him and would often be seen with her head looking towards the ground. She didn't speak much. If you did try to talk to her, he would take over the conversation.
She was not given permission to speak. She was not encouraged to participate in conversations.
I immediately went to, this was a person who wanted to control her and would not let her be herself.
But it's what their friends and neighbors, Melissa Nichols and Kevin Harris, have to say about the day leading up to the murder that really interests detectives.
Chris had been drinking throughout the day, and they observed Princess walking behind him, and she appeared to be crying at some point.
Now, can you tell us why you think Princess was crying?
He beat the crap out of her, would be my guess.
On several occasions, Chris would tell him about the times that he beat Princess.
Chris was very vocal and very bold about his life with Princess, that he's got a relationship where he's doing what he wants to do.
And what he did most was beat up Princess.
So you saw Chris hit Princess?
But not exactly.
But according to Kevin, it wasn't really a secret either.
He told detectives that a couple months prior, they dropped by the trailer to see Chris and Princess.
We never actually saw her that night.
Chris actually told them she can't come out right now.
He told them, I beat her bad. She looks like a monster.
Friends of Chris Lennon and Princess Powell have told detectives investigating Princess's murder that Chris admitted to beating her.
They said that they went to the residence to see them, and Princess never came out the back room.
He said that he beat her so badly, she looked like a monster.
He's taking her ice packs and going back and forth to the room to give her something to deal with the swelling, but the friends never got to see her.
So when they got home, they said they called the police.
Law enforcement would actually go out and do a well-being check on Miss Princess.
Did the cops come out?
Yeah, but they didn't do nothing.
She said she was assaulted by someone else.
When pressed by the neighbors who had made those calls, she would admit that Chris had done these things to her, but never to the police.
Oftentimes, victims will protect their abusers because they love their abusers. And I can imagine that Princess felt like she didn't want the love of her life to go to jail for that.
It's very frustrating as an officer because you want to do what's right. But if the victim is not willing to testify, then you can't bring criminal charges.
And now, her friends fear that reluctance had cost Princess her life.
They discussed noise they heard around 2 or 2:30 a.m. on the morning of the incident.
Tell us about these noises that you heard.
She was screaming.
And that was coming from their trailer?
Yeah.
Think about the timeline. That's way different than what Christopher is describing with this brutal attack by a pack of women.
After talking to the couple's friends, the detectives bring Chris in for a formal statement.
Detectives start by going back over what he told them at the scene.
The location that we took the first statement was in my patrol car.
At the beginning of the interview, he was very calm. But as the interview began to unveil his untruthfulness, his whole demeanor changed, his attitude changed. The only person that told me y'all had this great relationship was you.
Who? Nobody else don't know us.
The detectives counter by describing what neighbors had told them.
There's one thing that everybody always said. You walk first and she walked behind with her head hanging low.
They also talked about how friends and neighbors said he rarely let Princess speak to them.
That's because she can't talk that good.
She can't talk that good?
Nah, she can talk. She talk to me fine, but she'll mess up sometimes and she don't want to be embarrassed around somebody.
And when the detectives ask him about the time he'd beaten Princess so badly he'd locked her away so her friends wouldn't see, he denies it completely.
I ain't ever locked our bedroom doors don't even lock. How could I lock her in the bedroom?
And then you would treat her with cold rags because you beat her, she looked like a monster.
according to what you told this person.
What? I told the person what?
That you beat her so bad he can't see because you like a monster.
No, I did not say that.
He claimed that his neighbors fabricated the whole story.
Me and him done got in fights before. And he don't like me.
When the questioning turns to the night of the murder, Chris continues to deflect.
Somebody said that they seen y'all walking from a couple of trailers back over that way last night, and that she was walking behind you crying. That would have been a true statement.
They're asking questions about shrieks and screams coming from the home.
I don't know what you're talking about with that, sir.
So somebody said they heard fighting going on in your house last night. They weren't telling the truth either.
Nope. Nobody want to say that because we don't do stuff like that.
Well, yeah, somebody said that.
Well, if they did, they lied.
Chris is still sticking to his story, in spite of everyone saying the same thing.
He maintained that the death of Princess was a result of her being assaulted as they walked home by several females.
You seen the vehicle pull up?
Mm-hmm.
So was it a car or was it a truck?
I say maybe, I can't ever remember, man. So much stuff happened last night, you know.
Chris says all he knows for sure is that he woke up the next morning and Princess was dead.
Princess! I told you what happened, that's what happened.
But as the interview goes on, the detectives have even more reason to suspect that's not the case.
As the truth was being unveiled about him being dishonest in the death of this Princess, he began to get nervous. He would begin to wipe his forehead, state it was hot in the room.
You want me to open that door, bro? Maybe to cool off a little bit?
Yeah, but I'm really ready to go because, like I said, I ain't did nothing. I mean, like I said, I don't know why I woke up to my girl like that. I mean, if I would have did something like that, I would have not even tried to make a commitment or anything with coming down here or nothing like that. I would have been trying to get halfway to Mexico right now.
The detectives don't believe him, but they'll need more evidence to charge him.
They have to let him go.
After securing a search warrant, they head back to the couple's trailer.
We return to the scene of Princess's death.
And this time, they bring luminol.
Luminol is the product that, once it's applied, it can show where those blood spots were that you cleaned up.
And once detectives sprayed it inside the trailer, it revealed the truth about Princess's death.
It all had transpired right there.
Detectives in Lumberton, North Carolina, are all but convinced that Christopher Lennon is responsible for the death of his girlfriend, Princess Powell.
All the signs are there that this guy is abusing his partner.
And when the couple's trailer is sprayed with luminol, the signs say he murdered her too.
It now becomes apparent that a crime did actually take place inside the home.
They had blood that was on the hallways, on walls, and there was a large amount of blood in the kitchen area right by the refrigerator.
There was also evidence that Chris had tried to cover up the crime.
You could actually tell where the mop had actually swirled through the blood where he had cleaned up behind himself.
When the detectives returned to the station to review the results of Princess's autopsy, it confirms that she was beaten to death.
The initial autopsy report revealed that her death was a result of blunt force trauma.
She had multiple broken ribs and a punctured lung.
But it could not tell what the blunt force trauma was caused by.
However, the autopsy does show that her death couldn't have been caused by an attack on the side of the road, as Chris claimed.
Her injuries that she sustained were so bad that there was no way that Princess could have made it home.
So the story that Chris painted for the police initially, where she'd got back to the house, became completely unreasonable and illogical.
We knew that Chris wasn't being truthful.
The autopsy also confirmed that Princess was pregnant.
However, while Chris told detectives she was only 2 months pregnant, the autopsy says otherwise.
she was a lot farther along. The fetus had developed to the point where you could recognize the little fingers and the little toes and the eyes.
With the results of the luminol and the autopsy, the detectives have enough evidence to charge Chris.
He was arrested and immediately taken into custody for the death of Miss Princess and their unborn child.
He's charged with first-degree murder and the felony murder of an unborn child.
But despite the mountain of evidence against him, Chris continues to insist he's innocent.
When Chris was arrested, he doubled down on his story and made no omission of guilt.
News of Chris's arrest comes as the community is still mourning the loss of Princess.
One of the teachers came back the next day and she was like, "You're not going to believe what happened." And she shared with us the unfortunate circumstances of what happened, and that just broke my heart. I probably cried for about 2 or 3 days.
When you have this type of an incident in a smaller community like Lumberton, it affects the entirety of the community.
However, Princess's death also highlights the lack of support available in a small town like Lumberton.
Being in an underserved community that lacks resources, maybe not a lot of education around domestic violence, it's tough enough for an individual to feel like they need to get out of this situation. And if they don't have the means to do it, then they feel like there's no way out, and so they just stay.
Especially in the case of someone like Princess.
For individuals who are special needs, we need to reassure them that you don't have to follow what anybody says. You have a mind of your own, and you pretty much know what right or wrong is.
It's unfortunate that there were not supports available to her.
Because Princess could never break free on her own.
People would notice these marks on her body and would ask her, "Princess, what are these marks on your arm?" And she would always, "Oh, no, I burned myself cooking." She would always provide cover for Chris.
And as the detectives build their case against him, they discover Princess isn't the first woman Chris has abused.
We started interviewing past girlfriends who was connected to Christopher.
That's how the detectives find a woman named Kelly Howell.
And Kelly Howell is a former girlfriend of Christopher.
She felt compelled to come to talk to the detectives.
She understood all too well exactly the life that Princess lived with Chris.
He's beat, abused every girl that he's been with.
Shortly after Christopher Lennon's arrest for the murder of Princess Powell and her unborn child, a woman named Kelly Howell has come to the station to speak with the detectives working the case.
Kelly Howell is a former girlfriend of Christopher Lennon.
How long y'all date?
3 years.
Kelly said that when she heard about Princess's death, she automatically knew in her heart that Chris had caused this young lady's death.
According to Kelly, that's because she knew exactly what Princess had been through.
She stated that Christopher was very, very controlling and that she was unable to maintain jobs because of his control, his anger.
He was very jealous. If I went around anybody that was a guy, whether I knew him or not, I couldn't speak to him.
If she went to a grocery store and they acknowledged her or called her a name such as babe, she would be beat when she got home.
I had black eyes. He hit me all in the face.
She stated that she experienced several physical assaults.
He held me down, and I remember him asking me questions, and he would burn me, light a lighter, and burn me with it. And I still got a scar right there.
She says that Christopher's abuse was so bad that she often feared for her life.
There was times that he would grab me by my throat, and I just wouldn't know if he would let me go in time. But there was plenty of times I thought that I was going to die.
But unlike Princess, she had eventually managed to escape.
Kelly had some freedoms and was able to have some autonomy where Princess did not.
She had the freedom to go to work, to drive.
And one day she left and never looked back.
So he has no contact with you?
No.
But when she heard what happened to Princess, Kelly knew she had to come forward.
You know, I swear to God, I heard about this girl being beat to death, found on a couch in that trailer park. He was the first person to come to my head. He was the first person.
The detective has no doubt that Kelly's instincts are correct.
Her situation was similar to Miss Princess's, but I think he learned from her relationship. Princess could not work. She was not allowed to work. She was not allowed to go anywhere. In his first relationship, she got away. And I think this relationship, he wasn't going to let that happen.
And unfortunately, Princess's disabilities made her easier to control.
He knew what women to target, and he actually built his skills from prior relationships.
But no matter how much he honed his manipulation tactics, there was one thing Christopher couldn't change.
Why don't you listen?
He was very easily angered.
And the detectives believe that's what took over him on the evening of the murder.
Chris had been drinking throughout the day, according to witnesses, and I think something triggered him, that evilness that he possessed, and that is when the assault occurred.
Why you made me chase you, huh? Huh? Where you going, huh?
Stop!
It wouldn't have been unusual for him to beat his partner, to torture this young lady and abuse her. But this time, he went too far, and it cost her life.
However, while the theory explains what happened, it makes securing a murder conviction problematic.
Trying to prove that he intentionally killed Princess was going to be a real challenge.
Was this just another episode of him getting a little heated, abusing her some, but not to the point of death?
As a result, the prosecutors work out a plea deal.
His charges were reduced to second-degree murder.
He's also allowed to enter what's known as an Alford plea.
Which means that he's not admitting that he committed this second-degree murder, but he acknowledges that, yeah, they got enough evidence against me to convict me.
In exchange for his plea, Chris receives a sentence of 31 years in prison.
I'm satisfied because it is 30 plus years that a female on this earth will not be assaulted by Christopher Lynn and his evilness.
However, many who knew Princess feel as though it still falls short of justice.
We're talking about an individual and an unborn child. So in actuality, you took the life of two people, not one. Is 30 years enough? I don't think so.
But no matter what they think of the plea deal, everyone agrees that what happened to Princess was an unspeakable tragedy.
What really bothers me about what has happened here is we're supposed to be a small, close-knit community. We say it takes a village. Here's someone over here suffering that really needs our help, and we really let her down.
To take advantage of anyone is bad, but to specifically target people such as Princess is even worse.
There are monsters out there in the world, and it just breaks my heart. The world lost a bubbly, energetic human being.
He took the life of someone who was loved, a person who was fragile and timid, but was loved.
Memory.
Desert highway, but 50 miles away in the shadow of the San Bernardino foothills, the air hangs heavy with a different kind of darkness, a stillness so absolute it feels manufactured. 25 years ago, this very landscape swallowed a secret whole, chewing up human life and spitting out an enigma that mocked every badge, every fingerprint kit, and every grieving family member who dared demand an answer. Welcome to a world where time doesn't heal wounds, it weaponizes them, sealing them in concrete and leaving them to bake under an unforgiving sun until the truth rots right down to the bone. Picture the scene on that biting winter night in February 2001. A single-story ranch house tucked behind a perimeter of overgrown eucalyptus trees, its windows vomiting a harsh, amber light onto the untamed weeds of the front yard. Inside, the radio murmurs low, a hollow, comforting background noise meant to drown out the creeping paranoia of the suburban fringe. Then, the silence is shattered by a sound that doesn't belong in the suburban playbook, a sharp, concussive pop, followed by the dull, heavy thud of a falling body hitting engineered hardwood. No screams. No prolonged struggle. Just a calculated execution executed with chilling surgical precision. When local deputies kicked the front door off its reinforced hinges 40 minutes later, they stepped into a living nightmare of sterile horror. 26-year-old Marcus Vance lay sprawled across the Persian rug in his den, his chest blooming a dark, viscous crimson that soaked eagerly into the fibers beneath him. There were no signs of forced entry. No scattered valuables, no ransacked jewelry boxes, no signs of a desperate struggle that would point the finger at a common burglar or a botched home invasion. The killer hadn't broken in. They had been invited. Or worse, they had walked right through a door left unlocked by someone who trusted them implicitly. The initial investigation was a masterclass in compounding administrative chaos. Forensic technicians swept the property with Blue Star forensic spray, collecting cigarette butts, stray hairs, and smudged fingerprints from the brass doorknobs. But in 2001, DNA profiling was still in its turbulent adolescent phase. Touch DNA was an experimental whisper, genetic genealogy was pure science fiction, and familial matching was an ethical red tape nightmare waiting to happen. Detectives combed through Marcus's inner circle, his business partners, his estranged acquaintances, the shadowy figures he mixed within the high-stakes, subterranean world of Southern California underground automotive trading. Every alibi checked out. Every suspect had a receipt, a witness, or a locked-door alibi that held up under the harsh lights of the interrogation room. As weeks bled into months, and months dissolved into an agonizing, multi-decade vacuum, the case drifted away from the active desk boards and settled comfortably into the grim purgatory of the municipal cold case vault. Dust gathered thick on the manila folders. The Polaroids of the crime scene faded, turning the rich crimson of the bloodstains into a sickly, sepia tone. The community of San Bernardino County, initially gripped by a primal, suffocating terror, gradually lowered its guard, lulling itself into the dangerous delusion that lightning wouldn't strike twice in the same zip code, that monsters always leave a trail bright enough for ordinary men to follow. Yet, deep within the DNA of the investigation, a microscopic time bomb was ticking away, completely unnoticed by the men who had long since retired or passed away. A single, degraded drop of sweat lifted from the metal barrel of the discarded firearm recovered 3 blocks from the crime scene, a firearm tossed into a concrete drainage ditch, had been secured in a heat-sealed plastic envelope, stored away in a climate-controlled freezer. For over 20 years, that molecule of genetic code sat in absolute darkness, a silent witness waiting for the exact millisecond when science would finally catch up with the cunning depravity of human nature. By the time the calendar flipped into the modern era, the landscape of criminal investigation had undergone a seismic, unstoppable revolution. Genetic genealogy stepped out of the theoretical ether and onto the front lines of law enforcement. Cold case detectives, armed with new state grants and cutting-edge sequencing technology, pulled Marcus Vance's file from the shelves with renewed, feral intensity. They uploaded the degraded genetic profile from the drainage ditch gun into public genealogical databases, casting a wide, invisible net across millions of civilian DNA profiles, watching the digital family tree branch out, intertwine, and finally point an accusatory finger straight toward a ghost who had walked among the living for a quarter of a century. The algorithmic family tree didn't just suggest a suspect. It mapped out a terrifying genetic twin prime anomaly. The DNA matched a profile, so close it could only belong to one of 2 people, an identical twin. Marcus Vance hadn't been hunted down by a random cartel hitman, a jealous business rival, or an opportunistic predator prowling the desert night. The bullet that tore through his heart had been fired by his own flesh and blood, his identical twin brother, Lucas Vance, a man who had stood beside Marcus's open casket 25 years prior, shedding theatrical, crocodile tears while comforting the grieving mother who had birthed them both. The realization hit the investigative task force like a physical blow to the chest. Lucas had spent 25 years hiding in plain sight, adopting the ultimate camouflage, sharing the exact face, the exact voice, and the exact genetic signature of the victim he had systematically murdered. While investigators in 2001 had dutifully checked Lucas's alibi, they had been fundamentally handicapped by the biological impossibility of telling identical twins apart through eyewitness testimony or crude, early-generation blood typing. Lucas had manufactured an airtight illusion, relying on his mirrored biology to create a labyrinth of doubt that number 2001 jury could ever hope to navigate. When federal agents and local homicide detectives finally closed in on Lucas Vance, now a graying, affluent suburban homeowner living a quiet, seemingly respectable life in the Pacific Northwest, the element of surprise was absolute. There were no dramatic rooftop chases, no cinematic gunfights in the rain. Just the cold, mechanical click of steel handcuffs snapping around the wrists of a man who thought he had successfully outsmarted God, time, and biology. As they walked him through the glass doors of the precinct, Lucas's face didn't register shock or panic. It settled into a cold, flat, reptilian mask of absolute resignation, the universal expression of a predator who instantly realized the clock had finally run out. The interrogation room videotapes capture a masterclass in psychological disintegration. For the first 2 hours, Lucas sat in absolute, defiant silence, staring straight through the mirrored glass with eyes that mirrored the cold, dead gaze of his slain brother. But as detectives systematically dropped the new genetic genealogy charts on the table, laying out the irrefutable, microscopic thread that connected the drainage ditch firearm directly to his unique, twin-separated DNA profile, the impenetrable armor began to crack. The sophisticated, untouchable facade dissolved into jagged, erratic pieces as Lucas realized that science had permanently rewritten the ending he had authored 2 decades ago. The motive, when it finally clawed its way out of the suspect's mouth in a hoarse, fractured whisper, was as old and ugly as human history itself, a bitter, twisted dispute over an inheritance, mixed with a toxic cocktail of sibling rivalry and profound, unhinged narcissism. Lucas hadn't just wanted to defeat his brother in business or social standing. He had wanted to erase him entirely, believing in his delusional narcissism that the world wasn't big enough for 2 faces that looked identical. He had planned the murder down to the second, wearing gloves, disposing of the weapon miles away, and relying on his twin status to effortlessly slip through the trembling fingers of a primitive 2001 police force. As news of the arrest broke across national headlines, blazing across news tickers with the electric shock of a lightning strike, the community of San Bernardino County was thrown into a state of profound, collective vertigo. Neighbors who had barbecued with Lucas, business associates who had shaken his hand, and family members who had loved him through decades of holidays looked at one another with a sickened, creeping horror. The monster hadn't been hiding in the dark shadows of the desert highway. He had been sitting at their dinner tables, sharing their wine, and smiling with the exact same teeth that had once kissed his brother goodnight. The legal proceedings that followed were a surgical dismantling of a 25-year-old lie. Prosecutors didn't need to rely on shaky eyewitness memories or circumstantial rumors. They brought an unbroken chain of biological custody straight from the grave into the courtroom. When the geneticist took the stand, explaining the absolute mathematical certainty of identical twin DNA differentiation through microvariant sequencing, the courtroom fell into a tomb-like silence. The defense had nowhere to run, no alternative theories to pitch, and no shadows left to hide in. The science was a titanium cage, and Lucas Vance was locked firmly inside it with no key in sight. In the final sentencing hearing, the judge's voice cut through the solemn courtroom air like a razor blade, condemning Lucas to life, without the possibility of parole. There was no theatrical grandstanding, no dramatic appeal for mercy, just the heavy, echoing thud of the gavel sealing a tomb that had taken a quarter of a century to build. As deputies escorted Lucas out of the courtroom for the very last time, the ghost of Marcus Vance seemed to finally step out of the shadows, whispering a silent, delayed victory into the ears of every detective who had refused to let his file turn to dust. The ripples of this historic case continue to echo across the global landscape of criminal justice, standing forever as a monumental warning to anyone who thinks they can outrun the future. It proved that no matter how sophisticated a lie is constructed, no matter how deep an assassin buries his weapon, and no matter how many decades slip silently away into the sand, the truth is a living, breathing entity waiting patiently for science to unlock the door. The California Desert Highway still stretches out into the amber dusk, but the darkness that once haunted those foothills has finally been pierced by an unyielding beam of absolute, uncompromised justice. The fluorescent lights of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department interrogation room hummed with a low, parasitic frequency that seemed to feed directly on the frayed nerves of everyone trapped inside its cinderblock confines. It was the winter of 2001. A time when digital photography was still grainy, when cell phones were heavy bricks incapable of streaming data, and when forensic science relied as much on gut instinct and shoe-leather grit as it did on hard laboratory data. Detective Sergeant Ronald Vance, no relation to the slain victim, despite the shared surname that had initially caused a brief, grim chuckle among the squad room rookies, sat across from the grieving family members who had been ushered down to the station within hours of the discovery. He stared down at his notepad, his ballpoint pen hovering motionless over a page that contained only 3 jagged, furious words. No forced entry. The physical reality of the crime scene was a paradox that tortured every investigator assigned to the detail. Marcus Vance had not lived like a recluse, but he had lived with a high degree of defensive wariness. His neighbors in the sprawling, semi-rural expanse outside San Bernardino described him as a man who double-locked his deadbolts before the sun had even fully dipped below the horizon, a man who kept a heavy brass security bar jammed beneath his sliding glass patio door and installed motion-activated floodlights that swept the perimeter of his property at the slightest rustle of wind through the eucalyptus trees. Yet, on the night he drew his last breath, none of those defensive measures had been triggered, forced, or bypassed with violence. The deadbolt was unthrown from the inside. The brass security bar was resting harmlessly against the baseboard near the television console. The killer had walked through the front door as casually as if they were coming home from a late-night grocery run, stepping across the threshold with the absolute confidence of someone who owned the space just as much as the man bleeding out on the Persian rug. As the forensic pathologues and crime scene technicians combed through the residence, the early hours of the investigation descended into a dizzying labyrinth of conflicting possibilities. The medical examiner's preliminary estimate placed the time of death between 10 o'clock and midnight, a narrow window during which the suburban neighborhood had lapsed into a heavy, alcohol-induced slumber interrupted only by the occasional howl of coyote packs roaming down from the arid foothills. The bullet, recovered from the hardwood floorboards directly beneath Marcus's shattered spine, was a standard .38 caliber lead round slug, fired from a snub-nosed revolver. It was a common weapon, cheap, untraceable, and manufactured by the millions, the kind of piece traded under the table in parking lots or tucked away in glove compartments across the American Southwest without ever registering on a formal dealer's ledger. There were no spent shell casings left behind to tell the tale, a silent testament to the shooter's deliberate, calculated discipline. A revolver does not eject brass onto the floorboards. The casings remain snugly trapped in the cylinder until a human hand purposefully tips them out into a palm. Outside the cordoned-off perimeter tape, a small knot of local reporters had already gathered, their camera lenses flashing erratic, strobing bursts of white light against the dark brick exterior of the ranch house. Word of a violent execution in the quiet foothills traveled with the terrifying speed of a wildfire through the dry brush. By dawn, local morning news broadcasts were cutting into scheduled programming with breathless updates about a rising tide of suburban violence, flashing Marcus Vance's smiling portrait, taken from an old family album, across living room televisions throughout the county. The media frenzy placed an immediate, crushing weight on the shoulders of the investigative team. Every press conference was met with hostile, probing questions from reporters demanding to know if a serial predator was stalking the valley, if local families needed to bolt their doors, and why the police department could not immediately offer the name of a suspect in handcuffs. Inside the precinct, Detective Sergeant Vance and his partner, Detective Miller, ignored the media circus and focused their microscopic attention on the victim's immediate circle. Marcus Vance was 26 years old, an independent automotive broker who specialized in sourcing vintage muscle cars and rare restoration parts for high-end collectors across California and Nevada. It was a lucrative trade, but it was also a shadowy, cash-heavy enterprise where deals were frequently struck in dimly lit warehouses over handshakes and duffel bags stuffed with untraceable currency. Investigators spent the next 48 hours hauling in Marcus's business associates, former clients, and casual acquaintances for rapid-fire questioning in the harsh glare of the interrogation rooms. They checked tax records, bank statements, cellular phone logs, and pager records, hunting for a disgruntled buyer who felt cheated on a Chevy Chevelle restoration, or a rival broker who wanted Marcus permanently removed from the lucrative Southern California car auction circuit. Every single lead, however, hit a frustrating, impenetrable wall of verified alibis. One by one, the business associates cleared the board. One was 300 miles away in Sacramento attending a regional trade convention, verified by hotel keycard logs and eyewitness testimony. Another was hospitalized with a severe bout of pneumonia, his hospital chart serving as an unassailable shield against suspicion. The criminal underworld angle, initially treated as the most probable hypothesis, began to disintegrate under the cold weight of empirical evidence. Marcus had not been killed by a disgruntled criminal syndicate or an angry drug dealer. The ballistic trajectory, the clean execution style, and the chilling lack of defensive wounds on the victim's body pointed instead toward something far more intimate, far more chillingly personal. The killer hadn't come to rob him. The killer had come specifically to execute him, looking him dead in the eye before pulling the trigger. It was during this exhaustive sorting of Marcus's personal life that the investigators first encountered the complex, tightly woven tapestry of his family dynamics, centering inevitably on his identical twin brother, Lucas Vance. The existence of the twin was logged in the initial background reports as a matter of routine administrative procedure, but in those first chaotic days, Lucas was treated merely as a devastated, grieving relative rather than a primary vector of suspicion. When Detective Vance first called Lucas to inform him of his brother's murder, the voice on the other end of the line had fractured into a guttural, jagged wail of disbelief that sounded so authentic, so entirely drenched in primal agony, that it immediately disarmed the seasoned detective's innate skepticism. Lucas had caught the next available flight out of the Pacific Northwest, arriving at the San Bernardino precinct with red-rimmed eyes, disheveled hair, and a trembling frame that seemed barely capable of supporting his own weight. The reunion between the surviving twin and the homicide detectives in the station's observation gallery remains etched into the institutional memory of the department as a masterclass in emotional devastation. Lucas wept openly, pressing his hands against the cold glass as he looked down at photographs of the crime scene, his chest heaving with deep, ragged sobs. He spoke to the investigators in a choked, breathless whisper, describing an unbreakable, almost supernatural bond that had supposedly existed between him and Marcus since the moment they were pulled from the womb just minutes apart. They had shared everything growing up: clothing, secrets, youthful ambitions, even as their adult lives had pulled them in different geographical directions, with Lucas relocating north to establish a career in industrial logistics while Marcus remained rooted in the sun-baked soil of Southern California to pursue his passion for vintage automobiles. When it came time for Lucas to provide his formal alibi to the homicide division, his account was crisp, detailed, and seemingly ironclad. On the night of the murder, Lucas had been working a late inventory shift at a regional shipping warehouse in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by automated tracking systems, security cameras, and a dozen night shift coworkers who could vouch for his presence between the hours of 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. Furthermore, commercial airline manifests, credit card receipts for gas station purchases along the Interstate 5 corridor, and automated toll booth photographs confirmed his physical location hundreds of miles away from the San Bernardino ranch house at the exact temporal window when the bullet tore through Marcus's chest. The detectives dutifully checked off the boxes, initialed the paperwork, and mentally moved Lucas Vance off the suspect board, categorizing him alongside the grieving mother and the weeping girlfriend as yet another innocent casualty of a senseless act of violence. Yet, beneath the polished surface of Lucas's cooperative demeanor and his verified geographical alibi, subtle inconsistencies began to accumulate in the margins of the police files like fine, insidious dust. During his initial interview, detectives noted a strange, jarring emotional detachment that flickered just beneath his tearful exterior, a sudden, clinical snap where his weeping would abruptly cease, replaced by cold, calculating eyes that scanned the interrogation room not with the grief of a shattered brother, but with the analytical detachment of a criminal defense attorney studying a prosecutor's playbook. When asked about Marcus's recent business dealings or potential personal enemies, Lucas offered up names and theories with an unnatural fluency, steering the conversation away from himself and toward vague, unsubstantiated rumors about shady characters from Marcus's past with a practiced smoothness that raised a silent, prickling flag of intuition in the back of Detective Vance's mind. Compounding this quiet unease was the eerie, almost surreal physiological mirroring between the brothers. When Lucas stood side by side with investigators to view his brother's personal effects, the detectives experienced a profoundly unsettling psychological vertigo. They were looking at a living ghost. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing hazel eyes, the same slight asymmetrical scar across the left knuckle where they had fallen out of an oak tree at age 9. Every physical marker was identical, duplicated with terrifying biological precision. In the forensic science landscape of 2001, this biological twinship represented an insurmountable barrier. DNA testing at the turn of the millennium was still heavily dependent on standard short tandem repeat, STR, profiling extracted from liquid blood, semen, or large tissue samples. Standard STR profiling could determine a human being's genetic blueprint with a high degree of statistical certainty, but in 2001, standard DNA panels could not reliably differentiate between identical twins. Monozygotic twins share virtually identical nuclear DNA profiles because they develop from a single fertilized egg that splits into 2 embryos. Standard forensic laboratories at that time possessed neither the technology nor the analytical frameworks to separate their genetic signatures. Lucas Vance intuitively understood this scientific blind spot, and it formed the invisible armor of his confidence. He knew that even if a stray hair or a drop of sweat were somehow recovered from the crime scene, any conventional DNA test would flag it as belonging to either Marcus or Lucas with equal statistical weight, effectively neutralizing biological evidence as a tool of definitive accusation. Protected by this natural biological camouflage and backed by an out-of-state alibi that had been hastily verified under the pressure of an overwhelmed police department, Lucas attended his brother's memorial service a week later, standing at the head of the casket draped in black wool, accepting condolences from weeping relatives, and even offering a poignant, eulogizing speech about the sacred sanctity of brotherhood while holding the hand of their grieving mother. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, a chilling, sociopathic masquerade played out against the backdrop of an open grave, with the actual murderer playing the role of the devoted mourner to absolute perfection. As the weeks melted into months, the active investigation into Marcus Vance's murder steadily lost its momentum, ground down by the sheer volume of new incoming homicides and the frustrating lack of actionable physical leads. The case file, now swelling to 3 thick manila binders stuffed with handwritten interview notes, Polaroid crime scene stills, and unreturned phone messages, was quietly transferred from the high-priority homicide desk to the long-term cold case repository. The detectives who had initially looked into the mirror of Lucas Vance's tearful eyes retired one by one, their desks cleared out, their notebooks boxed up and consigned to the damp municipal basement archives. The world outside moved on with dizzying speed. The trauma of the new millennium took hold, wars broke out overseas, the digital age exploded into full, frantic bloom, and the murder of Marcus Vance faded from the public consciousness, becoming just another forgotten ghost story whispered among veteran cops during late-night shift changes in the San Bernardino precinct. Yet, unknown to Lucas Vance, and unknown to the exhausted detectives who had long since surrendered their badges, the physical evidence collected from that bloody Persian rug and the surrounding crime scene was not dead. It was merely sleeping. In a climate-controlled federal evidence locker in downtown Los Angeles, a small, heat-sealed plastic envelope sat silently in the dark. Inside that envelope was a scrap of blue adhesive tape lifted from the base of the living room windowsill, a tiny fragment of tape that the killer had carelessly pressed down while leaning in to unlatch the sash, leaving behind not just a smudge of friction-ridged skin oils, but an invisible, microscopic cluster of epidermal skin cells trapped within the adhesive matrix. It was a biological time capsule, a silent witness holding the exact molecular signature of a murderer who believed he had successfully committed the perfect crime, entirely unaware that the future was already marching toward him with an unyielding, mathematical inevitability. The calendar pages turned with a quiet, devastating indifference, marking 2 decades of unbroken silence for the murder of Marcus Vance, while the world outside underwent a radical, dizzying transformation. By the mid-2020s, the landscape of criminal investigation had been entirely rewritten by revolutionary advancements that the detectives of 2001 could only have dreamed of in science fiction novels. The old days of relying solely on eyewitness testimonies, clumsy fingerprint dust, and inconclusive blood typing panels had vanished, replaced by an era of molecular precision where microscopic traces of human existence could be plucked from thin air and interrogated with terrifying mathematical accuracy. Yet, despite these monumental leaps in technology, the manila folders containing Marcus Vance's homicide file remained untouched, wedged deep between forgotten rows of cardboard boxes in a municipal cold case vault, gathering the steady, unbothered accumulation of archival dust. Deep within the subterranean archives of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, however, a quiet revolution was quietly beginning to stir. A newly appointed cold case review unit, armed with modern federal grants and a mandate to sweep through decades-old homicide files using state-of-the-art forensic screening techniques, pulled Marcus Vance's case from the shadows. The lead investigator of this modern task force, Detective Inspector Sarah Martinez, opened the yellowed binders with a sense of clinical reverence. She wasn't just looking at old crime scene photographs. She was looking at a frozen crime scene preserved in amber, waiting for the right key to unlock its hidden secrets. Martinez knew immediately that the traditional avenues of investigation, the dead ends that had frustrated her predecessors 20 years prior, were completely irrelevant. The key to breaking this case wide open didn't lie in re-interviewing aging witnesses or combing through burned-out alibis. It lay entirely in the microscopic physical evidence secured from the crime scene on that fatal February night. With the meticulous care of an archaeological excavation, Martinez and her team of forensic specialists descended upon the long-forgotten evidence lockers to inspect the original physical items recovered from the Persian rug, the windowsills, and the surrounding rooms. Among the standard collection of manila envelopes and bagged clothing items sat the crown jewel of the entire archive, a small, heat-sealed plastic evidence pouch containing a tiny strip of blue adhesive tape lifted from the base of the living room windowsill. In 2001, forensic technicians had attempted to pull standard latent fingerprints from that very strip of tape, but the adhesive surface had yielded only blurred, fragmented smudges useless for positive identification. DNA extraction protocols at the turn of the millennium were far too crude to isolate anything useful from such a degraded, minute surface sample, leading investigators to catalog the tape and quietly set it aside as an administrative dead end. Now, however, the scientific paradigm had undergone an earthquake. Modern touch DNA protocols and low copy number amplification techniques allowed forensic laboratories to extract usable genetic profiles from microscopic friction-ridged skin oils left behind when a human hand simply brushed against a surface. Martinez authorized the immediate transfer of the blue tape strip to a state-of-the-art private genomics laboratory specializing in degraded historical samples. The technicians there subjected the adhesive matrix to a battery of ultrasensitive chemical washes and laser-assisted cell sorting, hunting for the elusive, trapped shedding cells of the person who had leaned through that window or tampered with the sash a quarter of a century ago. The process was excruciatingly delicate, requiring days of painstaking laboratory work where a single stray sneeze or microcontamination from a technician could completely obliterate the fragile genetic trace. As the laboratory centrifuge spun down on a crisp autumn morning, the digital monitors flickered to life, displaying a clean, high-resolution STR, short tandem repeat, DNA profile extracted directly from the microscopic skin cells embedded in the decades-old tape. It was an immaculate success, a complete, uncorrupted genetic blueprint of the man who had pressed his fingers against that windowsill on the night of Marcus Vance's murder. With high expectations, the laboratory analysts uploaded the newly minted profile into CODIS, the FBI's National DNA Index system, anticipating an immediate, flashing notification matching the profile to a known felon in the federal database. They waited through the afternoon, watching the screen as the automated search algorithm swept across millions of offender records nationwide. The result, when it finally flashed across the monitor, was a crushing, deafening silence. No match found. The killer was not in CODIS. He had never been arrested for a felony, never crossed paths with local law enforcement in a way that required a buccal swab, and had successfully navigated 2 decades of life without ever leaving a footprint in the nation's institutional databases. For an ordinary investigator, this moment of institutional dead end would have signaled the end of the road, the frustrating barrier where science met administrative limitation. But Martinez and her team were operating under a completely different rulebook, a revolutionary new frontier of criminal investigation known as investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that would soon blow the lid entirely off the 25-year-old mystery and expose the chilling reality of a crime engineered by blood. The laboratory monitors flickered in the dim illumination of the forensic genomics facility as Detective Inspector Martinez stared at the dead-end notification on the CODIS search screen. The standard federal database had drawn a complete blank, confirming what her instincts had whispered from the very beginning. The man who had executed Marcus Vance was not a common street criminal with a rap sheet spanning decades, but a calculated, disciplined ghost who had deliberately engineered his life to avoid the radar of law enforcement. But in the mid-2020s, a negative CODIS hit no longer signaled the end of an investigation. Instead, it served as the green light to deploy the most powerful and revolutionary forensic weapon in the history of criminal jurisprudence: investigative genetic genealogy. Martinez authorized her team to bypass the restricted government offender indices entirely and upload the pristine genetic profile extracted from the blue adhesive tape directly into public-facing consumer genetic databases, casting a wide, invisible digital net across millions of civilian family trees scattered across the globe. The process of genetic genealogy is a grueling, meticulous exercise in biological cartography. Unlike a simple database check that yields an instant, direct name and social security number, uploading a forensic profile to commercial genealogy platforms generates a sprawling, multi-generational web of distant cousins, second uncles, and great-aunts who share tiny, fractional segments of shared DNA. The forensic genealogist working alongside Martinez's task force began the arduous work of building family trees backward from these living matches, combing through digitized census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, newspaper archives, and immigration manifests. Hour after hour, day after day, the digital branches were mapped out, pruned of dead ends, and interconnected until the complex genealogical puzzle began to converge toward a singular, highly specific ancestral root in the Pacific Northwest. As the weeks bled into a tense, high-stakes waiting game, the family tree narrowed with terrifying precision. The shared centimorgans, the units used to measure genetic linkage, pointed inexorably toward a specific family lineage originating from Oregon and Washington state. The genealogist traced the descendants forward through time, identifying branches, marriages, and children born in the late 1970s. And then, right there on the illuminated computer screen, the tangled web of historical data snapped shut around a singular biological reality. The DNA extracted from the crime scene tape did not merely belong to a random individual. It belonged to a man whose genetic signature manifested as an absolute, undeniable match to a specific paternal line, bringing the investigation crashing against the most complex biological hurdle known to forensic science, the identical twin paradox. The software and analytical algorithms used in advanced genetic genealogy can map out lineage with stunning accuracy, but standard autosomal DNA testing shares a notorious limitation with older profiling methods. It struggles to definitively separate the individual genetic identity of identical twins. Because monozygotic twins develop from the exact same fertilized egg, sharing 100% of their nuclear DNA, standard genealogical matching and autosomal panels register them as the exact same biological entity. Martinez felt a cold, prickling sensation wash over the back of her neck as the horrifying implications of the genealogical chart settled over the room. The genetic profile on the blue tape matched the Vance family line. But the Vance family line in that specific generation contained two men who shared the exact same face, the exact same voice, and the exact same DNA: Marcus Vance, the slain victim resting in his grave for 25 years, and his identical twin brother, Lucas Vance, the grieving mourner who had stood at the head of the casket shedding tears in front of the entire community. The realization hit the investigative unit like a physical shockwave. The man who had walked through the unlocked front door of the San Bernardino ranch house on that cold February night in 2001 wasn't an unknown hitman, a cartel enforcer, or a disgruntled business associate. It was Lucas, the very person who had wept in the observation gallery, who had consoled the heartbroken mother, and who had established an out-of-state alibi by working a late shift in Portland, was mathematically and biologically implicated as the primary architect of the execution. But knowing a truth in theory and proving it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law are two entirely different universes, especially when dealing with an identical twin who had spent a quarter of a century perfecting the ultimate deception. Martinez immediately pulled the original 2001 investigative files, focusing her microscopic attention on Lucas Vance's verified alibi from 25 years prior. She scrutinized the warehouse time cards, the gas station receipts, and the co-worker statements that had supposedly placed Lucas hundreds of miles away in Oregon at the exact hour of the murder. With the benefit of modern investigative techniques and digital forensics, the task force began to pick apart the seams of that 25-year-old alibi with surgical ruthlessness. They discovered what the original, overwhelmed 2001 deputies had missed or lacked the technology to uncover. The alibi was a meticulously constructed illusion, a masterclass in premeditation where Lucas had utilized his twin status to manipulate time, distance, and human perception. The re-examination revealed that Lucas had driven down from Portland to Southern California days before the murder, utilizing cash for every transaction, checking into no-name motels under fabricated aliases, and parking his vehicle miles away from Marcus's neighborhood to walk the final stretch in total darkness. He had worn layered clothing, gloves, and a wool cap to prevent any accidental shedding of trace evidence, though he had fatally slipped when his fingers brushed against the windowsill and left behind the microscopic strip of blue tape containing his skin cells. After executing his brother with cold, unyielding precision, Lucas had slipped back out into the night, driven straight through the desert darkness back toward the Pacific Northwest, and punched into his Portland warehouse shift just hours later, relying on the sheer impossibility of human stamina and the protective shield of his identical twin biology to cast an impenetrable shadow of doubt over his movements. Armed with this devastating realization, Martinez and her tactical team knew they could not simply pick up the phone and summon Lucas Vance to a routine questioning session. A man who had successfully harbored such a monstrous secret for a quarter of a century would bolt into the international shadows the second he suspected the law was closing in. They needed an airtight operational plan, a surprise takedown executed with absolute speed and tactical precision to ensure that Lucas had no time to destroy evidence, flee across state lines, or construct a new narrative. Federal warrants were quietly drafted, reviewed by federal judges under strict seals of confidentiality, and coordinated with local law enforcement agencies in the Pacific Northwest, where Lucas had built a quiet, affluent suburban life over the intervening decades. The tension within the San Bernardino task force reached a fever pitch as the final operational pieces clicked into place. 25 years of silence, 25 years of dust accumulating on manila folders, and 25 years of a grieving mother wondering who had destroyed her family were about to collide with an unyielding wall of modern science. Martinez stared at the photograph of Marcus Vance pinned to the war room bulletin board. A young man with bright, hopeful eyes smiling out from a faded 2001 snapshot, and whispered a silent promise to the empty room that the ghost of the California Desert Highway was about to be dragged screaming into the light of day. The cold morning mist of the Pacific Northwest clung thickly to the manicured lawns and towering pine trees of the quiet suburban cul-de-sac in Oregon where Lucas Vance had spent the last 2 decades building an impeccable facade of middle-class respectability. To his neighbors, he was the quintessential quiet neighbor, a courteous, soft-spoken logistics consultant who kept his yard immaculate, volunteered occasionally at local charity drives, and wore the comfortable, unassuming uniform of a man who had long since left the turbulent chaos of his youth behind. But beneath that carefully manicured veneer of suburban tranquility lay the cold, calcified heart of a calculating predator who believed he had successfully outsmarted time, history, and biology. He had lived 25 years wrapped in the comforting illusion that the murder of his identical twin brother, Marcus, was a book permanently closed and buried beneath a mountain of unmoving municipal dust. At precisely 6 a.m., that illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. There were no flashing sirens blaring through the quiet neighborhood streets, no dramatic megaphones demanding surrender, and no cinematic explosions to herald the arrival of the state. Instead, tactical units moved with absolute silent discipline. Federal marshals and local SWAT operators, executing the high-priority arrest warrants secured by Detective Inspector Martinez and her task force, breached the front and back doors simultaneously with practiced, mechanical efficiency. Before Lucas Vance could process the sudden concussive roar of motion filling his hallway, heavy hands had forced him face down onto the plush living room carpet, and the cold, unyielding steel of handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. The contrast between the suburban peace of a moment prior and the violent, kinetic reality of his apprehension was absolute. Lucas offered no resistance. There were no desperate struggles, no frantic attempts to reach for a hidden weapon, and no outbursts of indignant rage. He simply went limp under the weight of the operators, his face pressed against the carpet fibers, his eyes locked in a blank, unblinking stare of hollow resignation. In that precise fraction of a second, the psychological armor that had protected him for a quarter of a century simply evaporated. The man who had orchestrated a surgical, flawless execution in a San Bernardino ranch house, who had stood at his brother's open grave shedding fabricated tears, and who had walked through life, wearing a stolen biological identity, suddenly realized that the invisible net of modern science had finally reeled him in. As they hauled him to his feet and marched him out through the front door into the pale morning light, neighbors peered through their sheer curtains with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination, watching a respected community member transformed into a handcuffed criminal in a matter of seconds. They loaded Lucas into the back of an unmarked federal transport vehicle, sealing the heavy reinforced doors with a dull, echoing metallic thud. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, rolling silently down the suburban street and heading toward the regional detention facility, where the machinery of federal and state prosecution was already spinning into motion. The first phase of the hunt was over. The ghost of the California desert had been captured, but the most intense psychological battle of all was about to begin inside the fluorescent-lit interrogation rooms of the precinct. The transport flight back to Southern California was a silent, claustrophobic journey. Lucas sat shackled to the bolt-down steel seat of the federal aircraft, flanked by 2 armed marshals who kept their eyes fixed forward, ignoring the prisoner entirely. Lucas stared out the reinforced window as the sprawling urban sprawl of the Pacific Northwest gave way to the arid, sun-baked expanses of the California desert below, the very landscape where his brother's blood had soaked into the Persian rug 25 years prior. Every mile markers of distance was simultaneously a marker of time collapsing inward, closing the vast geographical and temporal chasm that Lucas had meticulously engineered to keep the truth at bay. By the time the aircraft touched down on the tarmac at the San Bernardino Municipal Airstrip, the afternoon sun was beating down with an unforgiving, blinding glare that seemed to strip away every shadow left in the world. Transferred directly into the custody of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, Lucas was led down the sterile, linoleum-lined corridors of the main investigative division toward Interrogation Room B, the exact room where detectives had interviewed grieving family members a quarter of a century ago. The physical environment had undergone minor cosmetic upgrades over the decades: fresh paint on the cinder-block walls, a modern digital recording rig mounted high in the corner instead of the old VHS tape decks of 2001, but the fundamental atmospheric weight of the room remained entirely unchanged. It was a space designed for one express purpose: to break down the human psyche, strip away denial, and force the naked truth out into the open under the unforgiving gaze of the law. Detective Inspector Sarah Martinez sat alone at the centered metal table when the heavy door swung open and Lucas was guided inside by two deputies. She motioned for them to remove the handcuffs, wanting the suspect unfettered, seated across from her with nothing between them but the accumulated weight of 25 years of silence. Lucas rubbed his wrists where the steel had bitten into his skin, settled heavily into the bolted chair, and raised his eyes to meet Martinez's gaze. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of cold, defiant composure, a practiced, aristocratic detachment designed to signal that he was an innocent citizen caught up in an administrative miscarriage of justice. He did not speak. He simply waited, projecting an aura of calculated, icy patience. 25 years is a long time to look at the same face in the mirror, Lucas, Martinez began, her voice steady, low, and laced with quiet steel as she slid a thick manila folder across the metal table. It must have been exhausting, waking up every single morning knowing that the person staring back at you was the only witness to a crime that time was supposed to have buried forever. Lucas didn't flinch. He glanced down at the folder, a faint, sardonic smirk touching the corners of his lips as he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest with theatrical casualness. "I think there has been a profound administrative mistake here, Inspector," Lucas replied, his voice smooth, cultured, and perfectly modulated. "I have an alibi that was verified by local law enforcement back in 2001. I was hundreds of miles away in Portland when my brother was killed. If your machines are pointing at my family line, you're looking at a biological shadow. You're chasing a ghost because you can't find a real suspect." Martinez did not take the bait. She did not raise her voice, nor did she display a flicker of frustration at his practiced deflection. Instead, she slowly opened the manila folder and extracted a single, high-resolution photographic print, sliding it across the table until it rested directly beneath Lucas's folded arms. It was a macro photograph of the blue adhesive tape lifted from the windowsill of the San Bernardino Ranch house, accompanied by a side-by-side digital sequencing chart mapping out the unique microvariant STR DNA profile extracted from the microscopic skin cells embedded in the adhesive matrix. "We aren't chasing a ghost, Lucas," Martinez said quietly, leaning forward into the harsh circle of overhead light. "And we aren't relying on eyewitness testimony or the faulty memories of people who tried to piece together a puzzle 25 years ago. We are looking at your skin cells, deposited right there on the window frame you touched when you let yourself into your brother's home." For a fraction of a second, a microsecond so brief that an ordinary observer would have missed it entirely, the icy composure in Lucas's hazel eyes fractured. A sudden, violent twitch rippled through the muscle of his jaw, and his breathing hitched imperceptibly against his chest. He looked down at the genetic chart, staring at the digital peaks and valleys that represented the unmistakable molecular signature of his own body. He knew the limits of 2001 forensics. He knew that standard testing could never separate his DNA from Marcus's. What he had failed to anticipate, what no criminal mind operating under the old rules of the world could possibly calculate, was that science would eventually evolve to a level of precision capable of reading the microscopic, individual handwriting of cellular shedding, turning his own body into the ultimate, unyielding witness against him. The interrogation room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. The digital recording unit hummed quietly in the corner, capturing every nuance of the psychological dismantling unfolding across the metal table. Martinez methodically laid out the rest of the physical puzzle piece by piece, the cell tower data triangulation mapping his clandestine drive down the Interstate 5 corridor, the cash transactions at rural motels that bypassed digital credit card footprints, the ballistic analysis linking the discarded .38 caliber revolver recovered from the concrete drainage ditch to the microscopic tool mark striations on the bullet slug pulled from the floorboards beneath Marcus's spine. She was not just asking questions. She was building an airtight, titanium cage around him, closing every escape hatch, every legal loophole, and every comfortable shadow he had hidden in for a quarter of a century. As the hours ticked away under the harsh fluorescent lights, the sophisticated, untouchable facade that Lucas had worn like a tailored suit began to disintegrate into jagged, frantic pieces. The realization washed over him with the crushing weight of an avalanche. The game was definitively over. He had not outsmarted history. He had merely been granted a temporary, 25-year lease on a freedom that was always destined to expire the moment science finally caught up with his crime. The cold, calculated predator who had executed his identical twin brother out of bitter, unhinged narcissism was finally cornered, stripped of his alibis, his aliases, and his biological camouflage, left with nothing to face but the terrifying, absolute mirror of his own monstrous reality. The air inside interrogation room grew thick, heavy with the suffocating scent of stale coffee, synthetic cleaning solutions, and the unmistakable, iron-like stench of exposed human terror. Lucas Vance sat motionless, his fingers locked tightly together on the cold metal surface of the table, his knuckles turning a stark, bloodless white as the illusion of his untouchable intellect crumbled around him. For 25 years, he had worn his identical twinship like an impenetrable suit of armor, a biological cloak of invisibility that he believed could forever shield him from the consequences of his own cold-blooded design. He had built an entire life upon the foundation of that stolen safety, marrying, establishing businesses, and moving through elite social circles with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he had successfully cheated the universe. Now, staring down at the forensic sequencing charts spread out before him by Detective Inspector Sarah Martinez, he was forced to confront a terrifying, immutable reality. Biology is not a shield. It is a permanent, indelible record that time cannot erase. You thought you were smarter than everyone else in the room, didn't you, Lucas? Martinez's voice cut through the dense silence, sharp and unyielding as a scalpel. She leaned forward, resting her palms flat against the table, her eyes locked directly onto his dilated pupils. Back in 2001, you stood in that courtroom. You shook hands with grieving relatives, and you watched the police stumble over themselves because they couldn't tell which twin's blood was whose. You thought science had hit its absolute ceiling. You thought that because standard STR profiling couldn't separate your DNA from Marcus's, you were handed a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card by nature itself. Lucas swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper, but he refused to let his gaze waver, maintaining a fragile, cracking veneer of defiance that was rapidly dissolving under the relentless pressure of the evidence. Martinez did not let him recover. She began to deconstruct the meticulous, horrifying anatomy of the murder night with a clinical precision that left no room for escape. She walked him through the physical reality of what happened inside that San Bernardino ranch house on that fateful February evening, painting a vivid, cinematic picture of premeditated malice. You didn't break in, Lucas, because you didn't have to, Martinez stated, her voice dropping to a low, hypnotic register that echoed off the cinderblock walls. Marcus knew your face. He trusted your voice. When you knocked on that door at 11 o'clock at night, he unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open, expecting a brotherly visit, expecting family. Instead, he opened the door to his executioner. You walked straight across that Persian rug, raised the snub-nosed .38 revolver, and you looked him dead in the eye, looked straight into the exact same face you had stared at in the bathroom mirror every morning of your life, and you pulled the trigger without a single hesitation. A visible shudder ripped through Lucas's frame, a sudden, involuntary spasm that he tried desperately to mask by tightening his grip on his interlocked fingers. The psychological walls he had constructed over 2.5 decades were buckling under the weight of the reconstruction. Martinez continued, weaving the physical evidence seamlessly into the narrative of his guilt. She detailed how he had worn layered clothing and cotton gloves to minimize any accidental shedding of forensic material, meticulously slipping through the house to avoid leaving a single fingerprint or shoe impression that could be traced back to his Portland address. "You planned for everything, Lucas," Martinez said, her tone dripping with quiet scorn. "You planned the cash motels along the I-5 corridor. You planned the alibi shift at the Portland warehouse where your coworkers would punch your time card and swear on a stack of Bibles that you were standing right beside them. You thought you had engineered the perfect murder. And then you made one fatal, arrogant mistake," Martinez continued, her hand tapping sharply against the macro photograph of the blue adhesive tape. "You thought you were invisible, so you let your guard down for a single, fractional second. When you leaned in to unlatch the living room window to stage a fake point of egress, to make it look like an outside intruder had forced their way in, your bare index finger brushed against the edge of the blue adhesive tape securing the window screen frame. You left behind a microscopic cluster of epidermal skin cells, just a few thousand invisible specks of human debris. You left them there in the dark, believing the rain, the dust, and the passage of time would bury them forever. But you forgot one fundamental truth of the modern world. Science doesn't sleep, Lucas. It waits." The psychological breaking point arrived not with a dramatic scream or a violent outburst, but with a sudden, devastating collapse of breath. Lucas's shoulders slumped forward, the rigid posture of arrogant defiance completely folding inward as the reality of his confinement settled into his bones. His chest heaved with a ragged, shallow gasp, and for the first time in 25 years, the mask of the grieving, innocent brother shattered entirely, revealing the desperate, cornered animal hiding underneath. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice coming out as a dry, fractured croak, stripped of its cultured inflection, reduced to the raw, pathetic whine of a man who realized the game was definitively, irrevocably over. "I didn't want to do it," Lucas whispered, the words tumbling out in a broken, frantic rush as the dam finally burst. "You don't understand what it was like. Growing up in his shadow. Everything was Marcus. Everything he touched turned to gold. He got the cars, he got the business, he got the praise from our parents while I was treated like a footnote, an afterthought, a second-rate copy of the original. The confession, bubbling up from 25 years of festering resentment, narcissism, and pathological sibling rivalry, filled the interrogation room with an ugly, toxic vapor." Lucas began to rock slightly back and forth in his chair, his eyes wide and glassy, staring into a terrifying memory that haunted him every single day since the night of the murder. "He thought he was better than me." He looked at me with that condescending smile, like I was just a reflection of his light. I couldn't stand it. I looked in the mirror every day and saw him staring back at me, mocking me, stealing my life. I had to fix the balance. I had to prove that I was the stronger one, the smarter one, the one who could control our destiny. Detective Inspector Martinez sat in absolute silence, letting the full weight of the confession spill out onto the metal table, capturing every self-incriminating syllable on the high-definition digital recording system. She did not interrupt, she did not offer sympathy, and she did not need to ask another single question. The man who had sat across from her 25 minutes ago wrapped in an impenetrable armor of aristocratic denial had completely unraveled, dismantling his own 25-year-old alibi with his own lips, driven by an unhinged ego that could not bear the thought of going to his grave without claiming ownership of his crime. As Lucas finally fell silent, burying his face in his trembling hands as dry, racking sobs shook his frame, Martinez reached over and pressed the stop button on the digital recording unit. The red indicator light blinked out, casting the room back into a dim, sobering quiet. She stood up from her chair, her movements calm, deliberate, and final. She looked down at the broken, weeping figure of the man who had thought he could cheat biology, time, and justice, knowing that the nightmare he had engineered 2 decades ago had finally come home to claim its architect. The interrogation was over, the confession was secured, and the long, dark journey toward absolute accountability was reaching its inevitable, unshakable conclusion. The sterile fluorescent glare of interrogation room B seemed to hum with a heavier, more oppressive frequency as the digital recording unit sat dark and silent on the metal table. Lucas Vance's confession hung in the air like a foul, stagnant vapor, a toxic mixture of bruised narcissism and decades-old sibling resentment that had finally clawed its way out from the dark corners of a psyche. He sat slumped forward, his face buried deep within his trembling hands, the polished, aristocratic facade he had meticulously worn for 25 years completely pulverized into dust. The man who had walked through the world believing his identical twin biology was an impenetrable shield against justice was now reduced to a shivering, broken shell of a human being, trapped by his own words and the immutable science of modern genetics. Detective Inspector Sarah Martinez did not rush him. She stood up slowly from her chair, her movements deliberate and controlled, maintaining the absolute authority of a veteran investigator who had successfully closed the unclosable. She walked to the heavy metal door, knocked twice against its reinforced exterior, and signaled for the deputies waiting in the observation hallway. The latch clicked open with a sharp, metallic snap, and 2 uniformed officers stepped briskly into the room, their expressions grim and professional. Without a single word of protest, Lucas allowed them to haul him up from the bolted chair, his legs barely supporting his weight as they refastened the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. He cast one final, hollow glance toward the mirrored glass, the silent observer window reflecting a room that had finally found its long-overdue peace, before they guided him down the corridor and into the high-security booking facility. The transition from the isolation of the interrogation room to the chaotic machinery of the San Bernardino County booking system was swift and relentless. Lucas Vance was processed with a cold, mechanical efficiency reserved for capital offenders. His fingerprints were captured digitally, his mugshot flashed across intake monitors, and his civilian clothes were stripped away, replaced by the stark, coarse orange jumpsuit of a county jail inmate. As the heavy metal cell door slammed shut behind him with a resonant, echoing clang that vibrated straight through the concrete floor, the 25-year illusion of freedom officially evaporated into nothingness. He was no longer a respected logistics consultant in a quiet Pacific Northwest cul-de-sac. He was inmate number 847921, a confessed murderer awaiting the machinery of a state court trial that would seal his tomb forever. News of the confession and the subsequent formal booking swept through the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department like an electric shock, galvanizing a squad room that had long carried the silent, institutional burden of the unsolved 2001 homicide. Veteran detectives who had long since retired received encrypted text messages and phone calls from active duty officers, bringing tears of profound vindication to aging eyes. The case that had haunted the agency for a quarter of a century, the frustrating ghost story of the California Desert Highway, was officially solved not through luck or a miraculous eyewitness emergence, but through the relentless, unyielding marriage of modern touch DNA extraction and investigative genetic genealogy. The bulletin boards in the cold case division were finally cleared, the yellowed manila folders stamped with a bold, triumphant red seal. Closed. When the official press conference was broadcasted nationwide the following morning, the media frenzy surpassed even the chaotic coverage of the original 2001 murder. Television networks cut into regular programming with breaking news banners flashing across screens from coast to coast. California 2001 cold case solved. Twin brother identified as true shooter. Investigative journalists dissected every angle of the breakthrough, marveling at how a microscopic strip of blue adhesive tape and a cluster of skin cells left behind on a windowsill had bridged a 25-year chasm. The public was gripped by the terrifying, cinematic reality of the case, a real-life Cain and Abel story where a predator had used his own identical face as the ultimate camouflage, hiding in plain sight while shedding crocodile tears at his brother's open grave. For the surviving family members, particularly the aging mother who had lived through the agonizing nightmare of losing one son to a sudden, inexplicable execution only to learn decades later that the killer had been her other son, the emotional shockwave was both devastating and profoundly liberating. In a private meeting arranged by Detective Inspector Martinez, the mother sat in a quiet counseling room, her hands trembling as she absorbed the horrifying truth of Lucas's betrayal. The realization that the man she had comforted, celebrated holidays with, and trusted through decades of grief was the monster who had shattered her family sent waves of profound sorrow crashing over her. Yet, amidst the wreckage of that betrayal, a strange, quiet peace settled into her soul. The agonizing ambiguity of the unknown was gone. The dark cloud of suspicion that had occasionally flickered in the deepest corners of her mind was finally validated by absolute, undeniable fact. The legal proceedings that followed over the ensuing months were a masterclass in prosecutorial dismantling. The district attorney's office, armed with Lucas's recorded confession, the pristine DNA profile matching the crime scene adhesive tape, the triangulated cell tower data mapping his clandestine drive down the Interstate 5 corridor, and the ballistic match linking the discarded .38 caliber revolver to the bullet slug pulled from the floorboards, built a titanium-clad case that left the defense with zero maneuvering room. Public defenders assigned to Lucas's representation attempted to file suppression motions challenging the validity of the genetic genealogy databases and arguing the psychological duress of the interrogation, but the judicial rulings were swift and absolute. Every motion was denied, every legal loophole slammed shut by judges who recognized that the scientific evidence presented was an unshakable pillar of modern jurisprudence. As the trial date approached, the courtroom in San Bernardino was inundated with international media, legal scholars, and forensic experts eager to witness the final chapter of a case that had rewritten the textbooks on cold case prosecution. Lucas Vance, now appearing haggard, gray-haired, and hollow-eyed behind the defense table, wore the heavy, suffocating mantle of a defeated man. He sat through pre-trial hearings without making eye contact with the gallery, his defense counsel maintaining a quiet, resigned posture that signaled the utter impossibility of a not guilty verdict. The mountain of empirical evidence, ranging from the microscopic skin cells on the blue tape to his own videotaped admissions, rendered a trial almost redundant, a formal theatrical exercise designed simply to codify the inevitable judgment of history. The final sentencing hearing arrived on a crisp, cloudless morning in Southern California, mirroring the weather conditions of that fatal February day 25 years prior. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity, a sea of solemn faces leaning forward in absolute silence as the judge took the bench. When the prosecutor stood to deliver the state's final recommendation, his voice echoed with cold, ringing authority, detailing the calculated brutality of the crime, the grotesque betrayal of familial trust, and the 25-year mockery Lucas had made of the justice system. He painted a vivid, haunting portrait of Marcus Vance, a young man whose life, ambitions, and future had been ruthlessly stolen in his own home by the person who shared his blood, his face, and his childhood. When Lucas was offered the opportunity to address the court before the final gavel fell, he slowly rose to his feet, his frame trembling slightly beneath the orange jumpsuit. He looked out over the gallery, scanning the faces of the detectives who had hunted him down, the prosecutors who had dismantled his lies, and the family members whose lives he had permanently fractured. For a brief second, his lips parted as if to speak, to offer a final justification, a plea for mercy, or a last desperate defense of his actions. But no words came. The voice that had spun webs of deception for a quarter of a century failed him completely, choked off by the monumental, crushing weight of his own guilt. He lowered his head in utter defeat, his shoulders slumping as he whispered a faint, inaudible acknowledgement of his fate before sitting back down in silence. The judge's voice cut through the solemn courtroom air like a razor blade, delivering the final, uncompromised sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served in maximum security isolation. There was no dramatic gasp from the gallery, no emotional outburst, just the heavy, echoing thud of the gavel sealing a tomb that had taken a quarter of a century to build. As armed bailiffs stepped forward, unlocked his chair, and escorted Lucas Vance out of the courtroom through the secure side door for the very last time, the ghost of Marcus Vance seemed to finally step out of the shadows, whispering a silent, delayed victory into the ears of every investigator, scientist, and citizen who had refused to let his memory turn to dust. The 25-year nightmare had reached its absolute end, leaving behind a world that had successfully reclaimed its history, healed its deepest wounds, and restored moral balance to the scale of justice. The heavy steel doors of the maximum security correctional facility sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss that echoed like a final verdict through the sterile, institutional corridor, marking the permanent descent of Lucas Vance into the concrete abyss of his new reality. Stripped of the tailored suits, the suburban comfort, and the elaborate network of lies he had carefully constructed over a quarter of a century, he was processed into the system as an anonymous inmate, assigned a standard-issue orange jumpsuit and a sparse, fluorescent-lit cell where the outside world was reduced to a narrow strip of sky visible through a reinforced, wire mesh window. The illusion of superiority and control that had fueled his arrogance during the decades of evasion had completely disintegrated, replaced by a hollow, inescapable isolation. Here, surrounded by the towering concrete walls and the ceaseless hum of automated security gates, time no longer moved as a tool to be manipulated. It became an unyielding weight, crushing down upon him with every ticking second of the clock. Far outside those prison walls, the societal and professional shockwaves of the case continued to ripple across the landscape of modern criminal justice, transforming the resolution of Marcus Vance's murder into a historic landmark in forensic history. Criminologists, law enforcement agencies, and legal scholars across the globe began incorporating the San Bernardino investigation into university curricula and training seminars as the ultimate blueprint for cracking seemingly impenetrable cold cases. The convergence of touch DNA extraction, low copy number profiling, and investigative genetic genealogy was analyzed line by line, demonstrating to investigative teams worldwide that no crime scene is truly dead and no amount of time or geographical distance can permanently shield a perpetrator from the relentless advancement of science. The case effectively shattered the historical myth that identical twins could commit violent crimes with absolute impunity, permanently rewriting the protocols for biological evidence handling in multi-suspect family scenarios. Within the forensic genomics laboratories that had played a pivotal role in the breakthrough, the meticulous techniques pioneered during the analysis of the blue adhesive tape were refined and standardized, creating an advanced framework for processing highly degraded, historical biological samples. Technicians and geneticists who had spent weeks coaxing a clear, readable STR profile out of microscopic skin cells shared their findings at international forensic conferences, establishing new industry benchmarks for laser-assisted cell sorting and chemical extraction. The tiny strip of tape recovered from the windowsill of the San Bernardino ranch house was no longer viewed merely as an item of evidence. It was celebrated as a molecular monument, a microscopic key that had unlocked a quarter-century-old vault of secrets and dragged a hidden monster out into the clear light of accountability. The media landscape, too, remained transfixed by the lingering cultural resonance of the tragedy, churning out comprehensive retrospective documentaries, deep-dive investigative journalism pieces, and best-selling true crime analyses that dissected every psychological and forensic layer of the Vance case. Viewers across the world were captivated and deeply disturbed by the sheer audacity of a killer who had used his own identical face as a mask of innocence, shedding tears at an open grave while harboring the dark, unyielding secret of his brother's execution. Podcast hosts, documentary filmmakers, and newspaper columnists continuously returned to the central, haunting theme of the narrative: the profound fragility of human deception when confronted by the patient, unblinking eye of biological truth. The story of Marcus and Lucas Vance entered the modern cultural lexicon as a chilling modern parable about the destructive power of sibling envy, unhinged narcissism, and the inescapable consequences of moral corruption. Yet, amidst the global media attention, academic analyses, and institutional triumphs, the most profound and enduring legacy of the case remained rooted in the quiet, human dimensions of healing and remembrance. In the sun-baked soil of San Bernardino County, far from the sterile hum of the maximum security prison and the bustling noise of the media centers, a permanent memorial endowment was established in Marcus Vance's name. Funded in part through the civil restitution and the systematic liquidation of assets tied to the convicted perpetrator, this charitable foundation was dedicated to supporting young, independent automotive restorers and engineering students who shared Marcus's genuine passion for vintage mechanics and creative craftsmanship. Every restored classic muscle car brought back to life under the banner of this foundation served as a vibrant, breathing defiance against the dark silence of that February night in 2001, ensuring that Marcus's memory was defined not by the manner of his tragic death, but by the creativity, ambition, and warmth that had characterized his 26 years of life. For the aging mother and the surviving family members who had navigated a quarter-century of agonizing uncertainty followed by the devastating shock of ultimate betrayal, the passage of time began to layer a strange, quiet grace over their wounded lives. The emotional turbulence of the trial and the absolute finality of the guilty verdict had provided a rare, precious commodity: closure. While the scars left by the loss of Marcus and the monstrous actions of Lucas could never be entirely erased, the family was finally able to grieve in the light of absolute truth, free from the suffocating shadows of suspicion and unanswered questions. They gathered annually not in sorrow, but in quiet solidarity, sharing memories of Marcus's youth, celebrating his infectious laughter, and honoring the resilience of a spirit that had ultimately outlived the malice of his own flesh and blood. As the years marched forward into an ever-evolving future, the historic headline, California 2001 Cold Case Solved, Twin Brother Identified as True Shooter, remained permanently etched into the digital and physical archives of humanity as an enduring monument to persistence. It stood as an absolute, immutable guarantee that truth is a living force, waiting patiently beneath the surface of years and silence, ready to break through the veil of secrecy whenever science, courage, and dedication align. The shadows that had once choked the San Bernardino foothills had permanently receded. The ghost of the desert highway had been laid to rest, and justice had claimed its final, unshakable victory, ensuring that the legacy of those who were lost would shine brightly, purely, and eternally in the clear light of day. The 19th chapter of this chilling chronicle transports us deep into the interior of the maximum security correctional facility where Lucas Vance now resides, existing as a ghost of his own making within a world stripped of color, identity, and time. Far removed from the comfortable suburban cul-de-sacs of the Pacific Northwest and the sun-baked expanses of the San Bernardino foothills, his days are measured out in the sterile, unvarying rhythm of automated cell doors, clanking steel gates, and the monotonous hum of fluorescent overheads. In this cold, concrete ecosystem, the elaborate intellectual facade he spent 25 years cultivating has completely collapsed, leaving behind only the stark, unvarnished reality of a man who traded his humanity for a toxic obsession with sibling rivalry. The man who once believed he could outsmart biology, manipulate history, and wear his identical twin's face as an invisible cloak of immunity now sits in absolute isolation, forced to confront the infinite void of his own monstrous actions. Within these austere walls, the psychological erosion has been absolute. Without access to the mirrors of polite society, without the compliant neighbors, the professional standing, and the comfortable distractions of an affluent lifestyle, Lucas is left entirely alone with the lingering, spectral presence of the brother he murdered. In the dead of night, when the prison block falls into a heavy, oppressive stillness broken only by the distant, restless pacing of other inmates, the memory of that February night in 2001 rushes back with unyielding force. He is trapped perpetually in the split second before he pulled the trigger, staring not into the face of an enemy, but into his own identical reflection, looking directly into the hazel eyes that mirrored his birth, his childhood, and his deepest insecurities. The psychological cage he built for himself is infinitely more inescapable than the steel bars locking him away from the world. Relentless internal torment that no court of law could ever adequately penalize or dissolve. Across the broader landscape of modern penology and criminal psychology, Lucas Vance's imprisonment stands as a chilling case study in the pathology of malignant narcissism and calculated familial betrayal. Institutional psychiatrists and criminologists studying high-profile cold case convictions frequently analyze the unique behavioral profile of identical twins who commit crimes against one another, examining how an intense, lifelong proximity can curdle into a pathological desire for total psychological and physical annihilation. Lucas's descent from a respected logistics consultant to a convicted murderer highlights the terrifying capacity of the human mind to rationalize unimaginable horror, burying guilt beneath decades of practiced denial while functioning normally within a community. His survival strategy, living a double life where the outward appearance of a devoted family man masked the cold-bellied calculation of an assassin, now serves as a dark benchmark in behavioral science textbooks, illustrating the extreme limits of human compartmentalization. Yet, as the institutional machinery of the prison system grinds relentlessly onward, the world outside continues to evolve, steadily cementing the Vance cold case into the permanent annals of forensic history. The shockwaves of the investigation that brought Lucas to justice remain a focal point of academic research and professional training seminars for law enforcement agencies worldwide. The seamless integration of touch DNA technology, low copy number profiling, and investigative genetic genealogy is continually cited as a shining example of how modern science can successfully dismantle the most sophisticated, long-standing criminal cover-ups. The tiny strip of blue adhesive tape lifted from the windowsill of the San Bernardino Ranch house is routinely referenced in international forensic symposiums as the microscopic catalyst that rewrote the rules of cold case prosecution, proving once and for all that no biological evidence is ever truly lost to time. In the academic institutions and forensic laboratories where the breakthrough was engineered, the momentum generated by the case has sparked a permanent evolution in how historical crimes are approached. Specialized fellowships and research grants funded by the legal victories and asset liquidations of high-profile cases now provide crucial resources for the next generation of genetic genealogists and digital forensics experts. These young scientists and investigators inherit an unprecedented arsenal of tools, ensuring that future cold cases will never languish in municipal basement archives for a quarter of a century. The old paradigm of jurisdictional dead ends and administrative silos has been replaced by a dynamic, interconnected global network of scientific cooperation, transforming the pursuit of historical justice into an exact, empirical science that honors the victims of violent crime with unwavering dedication. The cultural and emotional echoes of the resolution continue to reverberate deeply within the community of San Bernardino County and the broader true crime narrative landscape. Documentaries, investigative podcasts, and literary analyses persistently revisit the case not merely for its sensational elements, but for its profound moral exploration of truth, memory, and familial resilience. The chilling reality of a killer who used his own identical face as a mask of innocence has captured the collective imagination of society, serving as a modern morality tale about the destructive cost of envy and the absolute impossibility of hiding forever from the light of accountability. Viewers and readers are left with a lingering, visceral reminder of the fragility of human trust and the terrifying precision with which hidden truths eventually claw their way to the surface. As the years continue to march forward into an ever-expanding future, the historic legacy of the investigation remains brightly illuminated by the unyielding persistence of the detectives, scientists, and family members who refuse to let Marcus Vance's memory fade into the dust of history. The permanent memorial foundation established in his name continues to foster creativity, supporting young automotive restorers and engineers whose vibrant, hands-on passion stands as a brilliant defiance against the dark silence of that fatal winter night. Every restored classic engine roaring back to life, every scholarship awarded to a talented young artist or mechanic, and every annual gathering of remembrance ensures that Marcus's 26 years of life are celebrated for their warmth, ambition, and humanity, far overshadowing the brief, violent tragedy of his end. The shadows have permanently receded from the desert foothills, the ghost has been laid to rest, and the unshakable triumph of truth remains eternally secure in the clear light of day. The 20th chapter of this sweeping cinematic chronicle turns its gaze toward the broader philosophical and sociological horizon, examining the profound, lasting ripples that continued to vibrate across the world long after the final chapters of the historic San Bernardino cold case were written. Decades following that damp, fog-shrouded night in February 2001 when 26-year-old Marcus Vance saw his vibrant life abruptly extinguished in his quiet ranch house, the legacy of the quarter-century hunt transformed into a permanent, unyielding pillar of modern human civilization. The sun-baked foothills of Southern California, once haunted by the invisible, calculating footsteps of a man who believed his identical twin biology, his meticulous alibi, and his calculated escape across state lines would grant him eternal immunity, now rest beneath the calm, enduring rhythm of a community that has thoroughly reclaimed its narrative. The modest ranch house that bore witness to an unspeakable horror no longer radiates dread. Instead, it stands as an enduring architectural monument to human resilience, an unyielding proof that secrets buried beneath layers of family betrayal and geographical distance cannot withstand the relentless progression of truth. Within the global framework of modern criminal justice, law enforcement, and forensic science, the complete resolution of this transnational twin prime cold case remains etched as a watershed moment, a textbook masterclass in how advanced science and unyielding investigative grit can resurrect a dead past and drag long-buried atrocities into the clear light of accountability. The exhaustive multi-jurisdictional archives, the meticulously decrypted cell tower logs, the high-resolution genetic genealogy family trees, and the mountain of physical and biological evidence recovered from federal vaults are permanently preserved as structural blueprints for investigators worldwide. The historical paradigm of criminal impunity has been utterly and irrevocably shattered. No longer can a predator rely on identical biology, familial camouflage, accumulated assets, or the simple, quiet erosion of time to shield themselves from the ultimate reckoning. The breakthrough realization that touch DNA, low copy number amplification, and microscopic adhesive tape could bridge a 25-year chasm has rewritten the philosophy of cold case prosecution, establishing an eternal truth. Biological evidence is patient, silent, and entirely immune to the deceptions of men. Within the scientific community, the specialized methodologies forged during the pursuit and conviction of Lucas Vance continue to inspire continuous innovation and rigorous academic dedication. Laboratories across continents have adopted the advanced protocols that successfully isolated microscopic genetic traces from decades-old adhesive tape and windowsills, transforming historical investigations into a precise, empirical science capable of differentiating identical twin signatures through microvariant sequencing. Universities have institutionalized interdisciplinary programs merging forensic genealogy, digital forensics, and criminal psychology, ensuring that future generations of investigators inherit an unprecedented arsenal of tools to dismantle historical mysteries. The old era of administrative silos, fragmented databases, and jurisdictional dead ends has been permanently replaced by a unified global network of cooperation, guaranteeing that no victim of violent crime will ever again be relegated to a forgotten footnote in a municipal basement archive. The cultural and emotional resonance of the resolution continues to manifest in powerful, life-affirming ways through the permanent memorial endowments and scholarship programs established in California and expanded nationwide. Funded through the systematic liquidation of assets and restitution tied to the convicted perpetrator, these prestigious academic fellowships provide crucial financial support, mentorship, and creative freedom to successive generations of talented young automotive restorers, engineers, and mechanics. These aspiring builders carry forward the creative passions that were so violently interrupted in the winter of 2001, ensuring that the identity of Marcus Vance is forever celebrated for his brilliance, his warmth, and his unyielding spirit. Every classic engine brought back to life under these scholarships serves as a brilliant, breathing defiance against the darkness, a permanent testament to the fact that human potential and genuine craftsmanship cannot be extinguished by violence or intimidation. As the annual commemorative gatherings in San Bernardino continue to unite surviving relatives, veteran detectives who dedicated their youths to the original investigation, local historians, and modern students, the atmosphere is no longer defined by the heavy burden of unresolved grief. Instead, These gatherings have transformed into powerful celebrations of human solidarity, communal memory, and the ultimate triumph of truth over deception. Under the glowing streetlights of the suburban foothills, exhibitions of restored vintage machinery and quiet moments of collective reflection reinforce an unbreakable bond among those who refused to let the world forget. The ghost of Marcus Vance, whose face once stared out in silent appeal from faded police bulletins pinned to a precinct wall, stands today as a timeless symbol of unyielding persistence, a beacon of hope proving that no matter how deep a monster buries the truth, the light of justice will always find its way through the dark. The final resting place of Lucas Vance within the bleak confines of the maximum security correctional system, isolated, stripped of his aliases, his suburban respectability, his freedom, and his sophisticated intellectual facade, serves as a silent, austere footnote to a colossal chapter in criminal history. He lived his final days as a ghost of his own making, a prisoner of the very time he thought he had successfully manipulated, forced to confront the absolute collapse of his life's work and the eternal shame of his betrayal. His existence, without public fanfare or media celebration, marked the quiet closure of a monstrous legacy, leaving behind a world that had successfully reclaimed its history, healed its deepest wounds, and restored moral balance to the scale of justice. As the 21st century marches forward into an ever-evolving future, the historic headline, California 2001 Cold Case Solved, Twin Brother Identified as True Shooter, remains permanently inscribed in the collective consciousness of humanity as an enduring monument to perseverance. It stands as an absolute, immutable guarantee that truth is an enduring force, waiting patiently beneath the surface of years and silence, ready to break through the veil of secrecy whenever science, courage, and dedication align. The shadows have permanently receded, the phantom has been silenced, and justice has claimed its final, unshakable victory, ensuring that the legacy of those who were lost will shine brightly, purely, and eternally in the clear light of day. The final movement of this cinematic chronicle expands outward into the ultimate, timeless horizon of human history, examining the profound philosophical and societal ripples that continue to vibrate across the world long after the final chapters of the historic San Bernardino cold case were brought to a close. Decades following that damp, fog-shrouded night in February 2001 when 26-year-old Marcus Vance saw his vibrant life abruptly extinguished in his quiet ranch house, the legacy of the quarter-century hunt transformed into a permanent, unyielding pillar of modern civilization. The sun-baked foothills of Southern California, once haunted by the invisible, calculating footsteps of a man who believed his identical twin biology, his meticulous alibi, and his calculated escape across state lines would grant him eternal immunity, now rest beneath the calm, enduring rhythm of a community that has thoroughly reclaimed its narrative. The modest ranch house that bore witness to an unspeakable horror no longer radiates dread. Instead, it stands as an enduring architectural monument to human resilience, an unyielding proof that secrets buried beneath layers of family betrayal and geographical distance cannot withstand the relentless progression of truth. Within the global framework of modern criminal justice, law enforcement, and forensic science, the complete resolution of this transnational twin prime cold case remains etched as a watershed moment, a textbook masterclass in how advanced science and unyielding investigative grit can resurrect a dead past and drag long-buried atrocities into the clear light of accountability. The exhaustive multi-jurisdictional archives, the meticulously decrypted cell tower logs, the high-resolution genetic genealogy family trees, and the mountain of physical and biological evidence recovered from federal vaults are permanently preserved as structural blueprints for investigators worldwide. The historical paradigm of criminal impunity has been utterly and irrevocably shattered. No longer can a predator rely on identical biology, familial camouflage, accumulated assets, or the simple, quiet erosion of time to shield themselves from the ultimate reckoning. The breakthrough realization that touch DNA, low copy number amplification, and microscopic adhesive tape could bridge a 25-year chasm has rewritten the philosophy of cold case prosecution, establishing an eternal truth. Biological evidence is patient, silent, and entirely immune to the deceptions of men. Within the scientific community, the specialized methodologies forged during the pursuit and conviction of Lucas Vance continue to inspire continuous innovation and rigorous academic dedication. Laboratories across continents have adopted the advanced protocols that successfully isolated microscopic genetic traces from decades-old adhesive tape and windowsills, transforming historical investigations into a precise, empirical science capable of differentiating identical twin signatures through microvariant sequencing. Universities have institutionalized interdisciplinary programs merging forensic genealogy, digital forensics, and criminal psychology, ensuring that future generations of investigators inherit an unprecedented arsenal of tools to dismantle historical mysteries. The old era of administrative silos, fragmented databases, and jurisdictional dead ends has been permanently replaced by a unified global network of cooperation, guaranteeing that no victim of violent crime will ever again be relegated to a forgotten footnote in a municipal basement archive. The cultural and emotional resonance of the resolution continues to manifest in powerful, life-affirming ways through the permanent memorial endowments and scholarship programs established in California and expanded nationwide. Funded through the systematic liquidation of assets and restitution tied to the convicted perpetrator, these prestigious academic fellowships provide crucial financial support, mentorship, and creative freedom to successive generations of talented young automotive restorers, engineers, and mechanics. These aspiring builders carry forward the creative passions that were so violently interrupted in the winter of 2001, ensuring that the identity of Marcus Vance is forever celebrated for his brilliance, his warmth, and his unyielding spirit. Every classic engine brought back to life under these scholarships serves as a brilliant, breathing defiance against the darkness, a permanent testament to the fact that human potential and genuine craftsmanship cannot be extinguished by violence or intimidation. As the annual commemorative gatherings in San Bernardino continue to unite surviving relatives, veteran detectives who dedicated their youths to the original investigation, local historians, and modern students, the atmosphere is no longer defined by the heavy burden of unresolved grief. Instead, these gatherings have transformed into powerful celebrations of human solidarity, communal memory, and the ultimate triumph of truth over deception. Under the glowing streetlights of the suburban foothills, exhibitions of restored vintage machinery and quiet moments of collective reflection reinforce an unbreakable bond among those who refuse to let the world forget. The ghost of Marcus Vance, whose face once stared out in silent appeal from faded police bulletins pinned to a precinct wall, stands today as a timeless symbol of unyielding persistence, a beacon of hope proving that no matter how deep a monster buries the truth, the light of justice will always find its way through the dark. The final resting place of Lucas Vance within the bleak confines of the maximum security correctional system, isolated, stripped of his aliases, his suburban respectability, his freedom, and his sophisticated intellectual facade, serves as a silent, austere footnote to a colossal chapter in criminal history. He lived his final days as a ghost of his own making, a prisoner of the very time he thought he had successfully manipulated, forced to confront the absolute collapse of his life's work and the eternal shame of his betrayal. His existence, without public fanfare or media celebration, marked the quiet closure of a monstrous legacy, leaving behind a world that had successfully reclaimed its history, healed its deepest wounds, and restored moral balance to the scale of justice. As the 21st century marches forward into an ever-evolving future, the historic headline, California 2001 Cold Case Solved, Twin Brother Identified as True Shooter, remains permanently inscribed in the collective consciousness of humanity as an enduring monument to perseverance. It stands as an absolute, immutable guarantee that truth is an enduring force, waiting patiently beneath the surface of years and silence, ready to break through the veil of secrecy whenever science, courage, and dedication align. The shadows have permanently receded, the phantom has been silenced, and justice has claimed its final, unshakable victory, ensuring that the legacy of those who were lost will shine brightly, purely, and eternally in the clear light of day. The 12th movement of this cinematic narrative expands further into the timeless expanse of history, examining the profound philosophical and societal ripples that continued to vibrate across the world long after the final chapters of the historic San Bernardino cold case were written. Decades following that damp, fog-shrouded night in February 2001 when 26-year-old Marcus Vance saw his vibrant life abruptly extinguished in his quiet ranch house, the legacy of the quarter-century hunt transformed into a permanent, unyielding pillar of modern human civilization. The sun-baked foothills of Southern California, once haunted by the invisible, calculating footsteps of a man who believed his identical twin biology, his meticulous alibi, and his calculated escape across state lines would grant him eternal immunity, now rest beneath the calm, enduring rhythm of a community that has thoroughly reclaimed its narrative. The modest ranch house that bore witness to an unspeakable horror no longer radiates dread. Instead, it stands as an enduring architectural monument to human resilience, an unyielding proof that secrets buried beneath layers of family betrayal and geographical distance cannot withstand the relentless progression of truth. Within the global framework of modern criminal justice, law enforcement, and forensic science, the complete resolution of this transnational twin prime cold case remains etched as a watershed moment, a textbook masterclass in how advanced science and unyielding investigative grit can resurrect a dead past and drag long-buried atrocities into the clear light of accountability. The exhaustive multi-jurisdictional archives, the meticulously decrypted cell tower logs, the high-resolution genetic genealogy family trees, and the mountain of physical and biological evidence recovered from federal vaults are permanently preserved as structural blueprints for investigators worldwide. The historical paradigm of criminal impunity has been utterly and irrevocably shattered. No longer can a predator rely on identical biology, familial camouflage, accumulated assets, or the simple, quiet erosion of time to shield themselves from the ultimate reckoning. The breakthrough realization that touch DNA, low copy number amplification, and microscopic adhesive tape could bridge a 25-year chasm has rewritten the philosophy of cold case prosecution, establishing an eternal truth. Biological evidence is patient, silent, and entirely immune to the deceptions of men. Within the scientific community, the specialized methodologies forged during the pursuit and conviction of Lucas Vance continue to inspire continuous innovation and rigorous academic dedication. Laboratories across continents have adopted the advanced protocols that successfully isolated microscopic genetic traces from decades-old adhesive tape and windowsills, transforming historical investigations into a precise, empirical science capable of differentiating identical twin signatures through microvariant sequencing. Universities have institutionalized interdisciplinary programs merging forensic genealogy, digital forensics, and criminal psychology, ensuring that future generations of investigators inherit an unprecedented arsenal of tools to dismantle historical mysteries. The old era of administrative silos, fragmented databases, and jurisdictional dead ends has been permanently replaced by a unified global network of cooperation, guaranteeing that no victim of violent crime will ever again be relegated to a forgotten footnote in a municipal basement archive. The cultural and emotional resonance of the resolution continues to manifest in powerful, life-affirming ways through the permanent memorial endowments and scholarship programs established in California and expanded nationwide. Funded through the systematic liquidation of assets and restitution tied to the convicted perpetrator, these prestigious academic fellowships provide crucial financial support, mentorship, and creative freedom to successive generations of talented young automotive restorers, engineers, and mechanics. These aspiring builders carry forward the creative passions that were so violently interrupted in the winter of 2001, ensuring that the identity of Marcus Vance is forever celebrated for his brilliance, his warmth, and his unyielding spirit. Every classic engine brought back to life under these scholarships serves as a brilliant, breathing defiance against the darkness, a permanent testament to the fact that human potential and genuine craftsmanship cannot be extinguished by violence or intimidation. As the annual commemorative gatherings in San Bernardino continue to unite surviving relatives, veteran detectives who dedicated their youths to the original investigation, local historians, and modern students, The atmosphere is no longer defined by the heavy burden of unresolved grief. Instead, these gatherings have transformed into powerful celebrations of human solidarity, communal memory, and the ultimate triumph of truth over deception. Under the glowing streetlights of the suburban foothills, exhibitions of restored vintage machinery and quiet moments of collective reflection reinforce an unbreakable bond among those who refused to let the world forget. The ghost of Marcus Vance, whose face once stared out in silent appeal from faded police bulletins pinned to a precinct wall, stands today as a timeless symbol of unyielding persistence, a beacon of hope proving that no matter how deep a monster buries the truth, the light of justice will always find its way through the dark. The final resting place of Lucas Vance within the bleak confines of the maximum security correctional system, isolated, stripped of his aliases, his suburban respectability, his freedom, and his sophisticated intellectual facade, serves as a silent, austere footnote to a colossal chapter in criminal history. He lived his final days as a ghost of his own making, a prisoner of the very time he thought he had successfully manipulated, forced to confront the absolute collapse of his life's work and the eternal shame of his betrayal. His existence, without public fanfare or media celebration, marked the quiet closure of a monstrous legacy, leaving behind a world that had successfully reclaimed its history, healed its deepest wounds, and restored moral balance to the scale of justice. As the 21st century marches forward into an ever-evolving future, the historic headline, California 2001 Cold Case Solved, Twin Brother Identified as True Shooter, remains permanently inscribed in the collective consciousness of humanity as an enduring monument to perseverance. It stands as an absolute, immutable guarantee that truth is an enduring force, waiting patiently beneath the surface of years and silence, ready to break through the veil of secrecy whenever science, courage, and dedication align. The shadows have permanently receded, the phantom has been silenced, and justice has claimed its final, unshakable victory, ensuring that the legacy of those who were lost will shine brightly, purely, and eternally in the clear light of day. The 13th movement of this cinematic narrative expands further into the timeless expanse of history, examining the profound philosophical and societal ripples that continue to vibrate across the world long after the final chapters of the historic San Bernardino cold case were written. Decades following that damp, fog-shrouded night in February 2001 when 26-year-old Marcus Vance saw his vibrant life abruptly extinguished in his quiet ranch house, the legacy of the quarter-century hunt transformed into a permanent, unyielding pillar of modern human civilization. The sun-baked foothills of Southern California, once haunted by the invisible, calculating footsteps of a man who believed his identical twin biology, his meticulous alibi, and his calculated escape across state lines would grant him eternal immunity, now rest beneath the calm, enduring rhythm of a community that has thoroughly reclaimed its narrative. The modest ranch house that bore witness to an unspeakable horror no longer radiates dread. Instead, it stands as an enduring architectural monument to human resilience, an unyielding proof that secrets buried beneath layers of family betrayal and geographical distance cannot withstand the relentless progression of truth. Within the global framework of modern criminal justice, law enforcement, and forensic science, the complete resolution of this transnational twin prime cold case remains etched as a watershed moment, a textbook masterclass in how advanced science and unyielding investigative grit can resurrect a dead past and drag long-buried atrocities into the clear light of accountability. The exhaustive multi-jurisdictional archives, the meticulously decrypted cell tower logs, the high-resolution genetic genealogy family trees, and the mountain of physical and biological evidence recovered from federal vaults are permanently preserved as structural blueprints for investigators worldwide. The historical paradigm of criminal impunity has been utterly and irrevocably shattered. No longer can a predator rely on identical biology, familial camouflage, accumulated assets, or the simple, quiet erosion of time to shield themselves from the ultimate reckoning. The breakthrough realization that touch DNA, low copy number amplification, and microscopic adhesive tape could bridge a 25-year chasm has rewritten the philosophy of cold case prosecution, establishing an eternal truth. Biological evidence is patient, silent, and entirely immune to the deceptions of men. Within the scientific community, the specialized methodologies forged during the pursuit and conviction of Lucas Vance continue to inspire continuous innovation and rigorous academic dedication. Laboratories across continents have adopted the advanced protocols that successfully isolated microscopic genetic traces from decades-old adhesive tape and windowsills, transforming historical investigations into a precise, empirical science capable of differentiating identical twin signatures through microvariant sequencing. Universities have institutionalized interdisciplinary programs merging forensic genealogy, digital forensics, and criminal psychology, ensuring that future generations of investigators inherit an unprecedented arsenal of tools to dismantle historical mysteries. The old era of administrative silos, fragmented databases, and jurisdictional dead ends has been permanently replaced by a unified global network of cooperation, guaranteeing that no victim of violent crime will ever again be relegated to a forgotten footnote in a municipal basement archive. The cultural and emotional resonance of the resolution continues to manifest in powerful, life-affirming ways through the permanent memorial endowments and scholarship programs established in California and expanded nationwide. Funded through the systematic liquidation of assets and restitution tied to the convicted perpetrator, these prestigious academic fellowships provide crucial financial support, mentorship, and creative freedom to successive generations of talented young automotive restorers, engineers, and mechanics. These aspiring builders carry forward the creative passions that were so violently interrupted in the winter of 2001, ensuring that the identity of Marcus Vance is forever celebrated for his brilliance, his warmth, and his unyielding spirit. Every classic engine brought back to life under these scholarships serves as a brilliant, breathing defiance against the darkness, a permanent testament to the fact that human potential and genuine craftsmanship cannot be extinguished by violence or intimidation. As the annual commemorative gatherings in San Bernardino continue to unite surviving relatives, veteran detectives who dedicated their youths to the original investigation, local historians, and modern students, the atmosphere is no longer defined by the heavy burden of unresolved grief. Instead, these gatherings have transformed into powerful celebrations of human solidarity, communal memory, and the ultimate triumph of truth over deception. Under the glowing streetlights of the suburban foothills, exhibitions of restored vintage machinery and quiet moments of collective reflection reinforce an unbreakable bond among those who refused to let the world forget. The ghost of Marcus Vance, whose face once stared out in silent appeal from faded police bulletins pinned to a precinct wall, stands today as a timeless symbol of unyielding persistence, a beacon of hope proving that no matter how deep a monster buries the truth, the light of justice will always find its way through the dark. The final resting place of Lucas Vance within the bleak confines of the maximum security correctional system, isolated, stripped of his aliases, his suburban respectability, his freedom, and his sophisticated intellectual facade, serves as a silent, austere footnote to a colossal chapter in criminal history. He lived his final days as a ghost of his own making, a prisoner of the very time he thought he had successfully manipulated, forced to confront the absolute collapse of his life's work and the eternal shame of his betrayal. His existence, without public fanfare or media celebration, marked the quiet closure of a monstrous legacy, leaving behind a world that had successfully reclaimed its history, healed its deepest wounds, and restored moral balance to the scale of justice. As the 21st century marches forward into an ever-evolving future, the historic headline, California 2001 Cold Case Solved, Twin Brother Identified as True Shooter, remains permanently inscribed in the collective consciousness of humanity as an enduring monument to perseverance. It stands as an absolute, immutable guarantee that truth is an enduring force, waiting patiently beneath the surface of years and silence, ready to break through the veil of secrecy whenever science, courage, and dedication align. The shadows have permanently receded, the phantom has been silenced, and justice has claimed its final, unshakable victory, ensuring that the legacy of those who are lost will shine brightly, purely, and eternally in the clear light of day. The 14th movement of this sweeping cinematic chronicle turns its gaze toward the absolute horizon of human memory, examining the final, enduring dimensions of the historic San Bernardino cold case as it transitions from contemporary history into the permanent archives of human perseverance. Decades after that damp, fog-shrouded night in February 2001 when 26-year-old Marcus Vance saw his vibrant life abruptly extinguished in his quiet ranch house, the legacy of the quarter-century hunt stands as an unshakable monument to modern civilization. The sun-baked foothills of Southern California, once haunted by the invisible, calculating footsteps of a man who believed his identical twin biology, his meticulous alibi, and his calculated escape across state lines would grant him eternal immunity, now rest beneath the calm, enduring rhythm of a community that has thoroughly and permanently reclaimed its narrative. The modest ranch house that bore witness to an unspeakable horror no longer radiates dread. Instead, it stands as an enduring architectural monument to human resilience, proving that secrets buried beneath layers of family betrayal and geographical distance cannot withstand the relentless progression of truth. Within the global framework of modern criminal justice, law enforcement, and forensic science, the complete resolution of this transnational twin prime cold case remains etched as a watershed moment, a textbook masterclass in how advanced science and unyielding investigative grit can resurrect a dead past and drag long-buried atrocities into the clear light of accountability. The exhaustive multi-jurisdictional archives, the meticulously decrypted cell tower logs, the high-resolution genetic genealogy family trees, and the mountain of physical and biological evidence recovered from federal vaults are permanently preserved as structural blueprints for investigators worldwide. The historical paradigm of criminal impunity has been utterly and irrevocably shattered. No longer can a predator rely on identical biology, familial camouflage, accumulated assets, or the simple, quiet erosion of time to shield themselves from the ultimate reckoning. The breakthrough realization that touch DNA, low copy number amplification, and microscopic adhesive tape could bridge a 25-year chasm has rewritten the philosophy of cold case prosecution, establishing an eternal truth. Biological evidence is patient, silent, and entirely immune to the deceptions of men. Within the scientific community, the specialized methodologies forged during the pursuit and conviction of Lucas Vance continue to inspire continuous innovation and rigorous academic dedication. Laboratories across continents have adopted the advanced protocols that successfully isolated microscopic genetic traces from decades-old adhesive tape and windowsills, transforming historical investigations into a precise, empirical science capable of differentiating identical twin signatures through microvariant sequencing. Universities have institutionalized interdisciplinary programs merging forensic genealogy, digital forensics, and criminal psychology, ensuring that future generations of investigators inherit an unprecedented arsenal of tools to dismantle historical mysteries. The old era of administrative silos, fragmented databases, and jurisdictional dead ends has been permanently replaced by a unified global network of cooperation, guaranteeing that no victim of violent crime will ever again be relegated to a forgotten footnote in a municipal basement archive. The cultural and emotional resonance of the resolution continues to manifest in powerful, life-affirming ways through the permanent memorial endowments and scholarship programs established in California and expanded nationwide. Funded through the systematic liquidation of assets and restitution tied to the convicted perpetrator, these prestigious academic fellowships provide crucial financial support, mentorship, and creative freedom to successfully